Hello and welcome to the My Hope Story podcast from Hope Community Church, Barlanark. Stories of hope, all about Jesus.
Who are we, but sinners saved by grace?
Excellent, right, we're going to start this. I have never hosted the podcast before, just up. You've never spoken like this before?
I've never guested on a podcast
Pete
before.
has never worked the camera before.
So we're just going to have fun.
So we have started a podcast for our church. Ant's kind of came up with the idea called My Hope Story. And so we've been working through our members and kind of getting their stories. But we also thought it'd be cool to get some kind of stories of people broader from our church. So our mission is to make Jesus known in Barlanark and beyond.
Yeah.
And so we're really keen that the gospel goes sort of beyond Barlanark and we can just see how the Lord is working there too. And so that couple with just reading this book, Stuart put this on Twitter, I don't know, was it a year ago?
I was running about that, I think.
And I ordered it because I've got a book budget, so I just order any book that comes up. And I picked it up in the year, and actually I couldn't put it down, and I read through the full thing in just over a week, and it was great. Yeah. So I thought it'd be great to get you on, Stuart. The two reasons I really like this book. First was that I thought I'd give a really good insight of what it is to grow up in Easterhouse, kind of Barlanark, this kind of East End of Glasgow. Clearly I'm not from here, Pete's not from here. Some of our members are, some of them aren't, and so I just thought the insight you gave was really helpful, so I want to talk to you about that.
Okay.
And then also, we call it My Hope Story, our podcast, and I think again, reading this, it's clear that Jesus broke in and gave you hope, which is great, so it'd be great to hear a little bit about that as well. But you want to quickly introduce yourself? Maybe give the 30-second version of this, and then
30-second version of that, okay. My name's Stuart Patterson. 30-second version is 16th of May 1997. I found myself 27-year-old sitting in the front seat of a car on my way to work. Guy stuck a gun in my back and pulled the trigger. I'd come through 13, 14 years of addiction and circumstances we're going to talk about led to that moment. But actually to the point, a week later, I walked in through the doors of a teen challenge centre in South Wales, and it really was God breaking into my life through a jammed gun.
That was great, man. That was 30 seconds. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. So let's go. There's kind of, I guess, two main parts of this. I thought it'd be helpful. So the first one is the kind of growing up in Easterhouse and I guess the addiction years that you kind of talk about in the book. So first, I was want to just describe some of the guys listening. Maybe some of our partners won't have heard of Easterhouse. So you want to give us your kind of a take on what Easterhouse or the East End maybe was like when you were younger, but also is like maybe today as well? Like.
Yeah, I think, I'm involved in a couple of Facebook groups that are Easterhouse, and the one thing that will come across in most of those groups is, as a community, just how strong we are, but we even were then, and the memories and all that then. So for me, those memories of growing up, early childhood, before I really got in, before actually I started experiencing life outside Easterhouse, you know what I mean, were really, really good. I mean, Mum, Dad, there was 5 of us, and then Neil came along in 1982, 10-year gap between him and my younger brother. Lived in a bottom flat in Easterhouse, but just to set the scene, at that point, the population of Easterhouse, it was social housing that was built in the 1950s as Glasgow was dealing with slum housing, and by slum housing we mean it really was very, very bad. It was Victorian era housing that was literally falling apart. There was no proper sanitation or anything, and this was the 50s, sorry. So they built these 4 large schemes on basically the corners of Glasgow: Drumchapel, Castlemilk, Pollock and Easterhouse. And, you know, God chose Easterhouse for our family. There's no other way to describe it. But the population at that time and getting into the 80s was something like 56,000.
Oh, wow.
So there was no... So I think we reckon that the stats say that in the 80s, that population, something like 25,000 would have been 25 or under, which is, you know, the 60s boom and you know, the summer of love and all the rest of it. And 25,000 people, 25 or under, there was no social interaction in the sense of organised activities for young people other than the odd church that maybe put on church clubs. There was no gyms, there was nothing like that. Remember somebody describing it this way, there was no coffee shops. There was nowhere to go and hang out with your friends other than on the streets. And so that became life for quite not a large percentage of Easterhouse kids, because the image it's portrayed is that it was most of them, it wasn't. But for the ones that I ended up running with, it was like that. Family life was good and bad. My mum was phenomenal. She would do everything she could. And my dad, in a lot of ways, was a typical Glasgow male in the sense, quite schizophrenic. You know, he could come home at a Friday night from work, take you camping. He's done umpteen jobs, steeplejack, chimney sweep, whatever to earn a living. But he could come home on a Friday night, take you all camping, or he could come home on a Friday night and you had to hide in your room. Because he'd been drinking spirits in the pub and he became a different person.
You say in the book that he got a bit of a reputation about Easterhouse, your dad, just for...
He did have, he was a no-nonsense guy. He could fight, he could hold a grudge. And so yeah, he did have a bit of reputation, and I think as I went into my gang and drug life, I probably benefited from that. Well, I know that I did on certain occasions when it was known whose son I was. You know, a lot of threat was removed, not because I was a fighter, I couldn't fight sleep. But yeah, so there was that.
There's a great story in it about when you went to the dentist or something.
Oh yeah, I like that story. I think that was my favourite one to write. It was called Bite Size. But it was a standout memory based on, I remember I was about 10, 11 year old. We lived in a tenement block, so 6 in a close, we're Aberdalgie Road at this point, 6 houses, you know, up the one common entry close. And I remember Tam McNeil, John Ross, upstairs, guys around about the same age as me. I'm up playing, there was no malice, but I fell and I banged my tooth off one of the stairs and my tooth broke, you know, half. But I'd been going to the dentist at this point, like every 2 weeks for root treatment, you know, this was before we got what do you call it, braces and all the rest of it. So root treatment was they went in and fiddled about your gums. So I'm going every 2 weeks. So my mum and my dad would always comment, oh, the dentist hasn't really ever mentioned that, you know, expecting it. But one day after about 6 months, and it's funny, I can still picture it, it was a dark, miserable winter's day, you know, and dentist was crowded, people smoked in waiting rooms, all that. You know, it was so picturesque in the sense that you would think some cheesy movie writer had written the scene. But I'll never forget that after I'd been in and the dentist tutted actually to me, which isn't in the book, about the way that he commented to an 11-year-old boy about a tooth, but he came out into a packed waiting room, I mean it's tiny, it was like a porta cabin, and commented on the fact about it was shocking that this boy's parents hadn't done anything about his tooth. And he'd done it so that everybody could hear, which really embarrassed my mum. And if you know my mum, that doesn't really do her well. And I could see the hurt in her. And so, you know, the shock. So you know, to try and, what she did was, she went home. And my mum, never known who my dad was and his reputation, she would never ever go to him to fight her battles because she knew what could result from it. But she was so hurt this time that she did mention it. And it was quite comical looking back at the fact that he's taken my hand and, you know, we've marched right down Aberdalgie Road and crossed over Easterhouse Road and up the side of the doctor's surgery and then around. The dentist sat at the back of the doctor's, you know, and if you knew the dentist that was in there, it was the right place for him, you know, hidden at the side. And into the surgery, and demanded to see the dentist, but the most controlled I've ever seen a man who had no control over his temper. And it actually came out, it was just hilarious the way that he made the dentist look in the appointment book and all the rest of it. And it was, how he handled it was so out of character for him. That, you know, it was, and everybody sitting there, I mean, you really could have cut the tension because they're all expecting Paddy Patterson to go mental and start battering this dentist out. But he never did that, and how he handled it was brilliant. You know, the dentist trying to bluff his way because he's this educated middle-class dentist, how dare this peasant, you know, come in here and speak to him, and if he'd known who my dad was, he wouldn't. And so it came out where my dad just made him find out, because remember, the dentist appointments then weren't computerised, it was books, and everything's written in, it was a diary. So he made him go back through and show that I'd been there every 2 weeks for 6 months and kept bringing it up. And then he was walking out the door and walked out the door. He just turned around and says, you ever mess with my wife again? I'll be back. A bit like Arnold Schwarzenegger. In fact, I'm convinced that scene was like they knew about my dad and this escapade at the dentist. But I'll never forget the way my ma looked at him. You know, and you can imagine scheme life, it's not often that a wife will look at her husband in that way. But I just remember that, you know,
he stood up for me.
This was her husband. He stood up for me. And I think that might have been why it never resulted in a bloodbath, because it was for my mum. But I remember walking, it seemed like all of a sudden the sun was shining and everything as we walked back down the street that day. But it was a standout moment of scheme life for me. And it's funny because I done a post on Facebook about that and everybody talked about a dentist, which isn't the point. I'm not trying to get people to nail, you know, my book, I always try and take responsibility for, no, it's not there to blame my dad, I blame my mum, I blame dentists or anything. I'm still responsible for decisions I make, no matter the circumstances surrounding those decisions.
But I thought it was a great insight, just into that kind of like your schizophrenic nature, I guess, is right, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, like brothers and sisters, how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have 2 older brothers. My eldest brother passed away Christmas 2002. Then there's Gary, and then there's my sister Yvonne, and then there's 2 younger brothers. So there's Dan, who's 2 years younger than me, and then Neil, who's 12 years younger.
Are you all like pretty similar growing up? Like, were you personalities the same, or?
No, it's kind of strange, isn't it? How can you take the same ingredients and have different results every time? And we always joke that my sister was more of a man than any is, but she's grown up in the middle of basically 4 boys because there was such a big gap for the youngest, and so it was mad watching. Like, my eldest brother John is one of the most loved people I ever set foot in the streets of Easterhouse. He was. So, he was a drinker, but he was a binge drinker, but he was ruined by a bad relationship. He took it very, very badly. It was very, very toxic, and it basically finished him off. It just took a few years for that to happen. But everybody loved him. I mean, he's one. It's trying to get how Easterhouse was in the 80s, where there was always people hanging about the streets. And John could come over and fall asleep beside any group of guys, probably anywhere in the scheme, and nobody would touch him. He was so loved, do you know what I mean? And Gary was, I don't know how you describe your Gary. I need to be careful because your Gary's still kicking, and he's probably one of the most foul-mouthed people on Facebook. But again, as big brothers go, he is a good guy. He never get caught up in the gangs. He had a bunch of mates that he hung out with, but never get caught up in the worst elements of it. Darren, again, get caught up in some of the stuff I did, but not to the extent that I did either. And Neil has just always had his nose to the ground, got on with it, used to run the Brig Bar just down beside the train station, and he's out in Lochgoyle now, but he's always just, my mum used to always say, when we used to moan that he was getting spoiled, my mum used to always say, quite right, and you lot should be spoiling him soon as well. So he's grown up with a sense of entitlement, which has served him well. Yeah. It's a bit like when you look about how Jewish mothers used to speak to Jewish kids, and that entitlement, you're God, you're God's, you belong to God, you can do anything, and Neil always had that, and it served him well. He's just never get caught up in any of the toxic side of scheme life.
So, like, I guess, saying that, you're talking a little bit about the gangs and stuff, so I'm not from Easterhouse, working here for 11 years, lived now in Barlannock for 5 or 6 years, and I guess some of the first things you hear when you're coming into that is the kind of gang thing that was there in the 70s. Like, clearly, I don't think there's much of that today in the same way at all. But what was that like? Should that kind of be out of nowhere, that reputation? Like,
it's not what was portrayed. I think there was a problem. There was a book done, I think it was based in the 60s, called No Mean City, which was based on the inner city gangs. And that was the Razor gangs and all that. So I think that no matter what gangs developed after that, they were going to have that same reputation. I'm not saying it wasn't deserved, but it wasn't. We were a bunch of guys. I mean, you're talking about there was real geographical boundaries in Easterhouse. There's 7 very clear areas. Yeah, there's very, very clear areas. So very naturally, guys began to hang out just in your own area. You already knew, it was already written into your DNA that you couldn't go into other gang areas.
And the different names, didn't they? What was the names or something?
Well, our gang was Easterhouse Young Agro. It used to be the Pack in the 70s. I don't think anybody knows why it moved from that. The other gangs, it was like Drummy, Skinheads, Providence. I mean, to be fair, we didn't really care about the other ones. Our rivals were the Drummy and the Dentoy existed in between them, but they were basically, we fought in their area.
And like, so that proper fighting, like, some of the stories, like, what was the one about the Loch End school or something like that as well, and your mum comes in, and is that the same one? There's one where your mum comes in and just...
Well, there's a couple about that. So what's happened was, so that takes me through, though, that skips ahead of Hutchison's, which I know you wanted to speak about.
Tell us the story, then we'll come back.
Aye, so the gangs, it was a funny thing was, so I had ended up, because of how my education worked, I ended up in Loch End High School. My problem was that Loch End was in the Drummies gang area, and there's a sense that I was more scared of my mum than I was the gangs, and that's not that where she was an overbearing bully. It was just, it was your mum. You couldn't. And so I went to Loch End, and I tried to come up with some excuses not to go, but it became quite a challenge. I made good friends in Loch End, some of them still have, but the other gang also went there. And I remember times, for instance, where I've gotten friends, and I'm pointing because I can still picture the buildings, So, for instance, there's one time I went in Frensham and the bell rang. I had to get down, like I was up on the 3rd floor, had to get down those stairs, and then and there was boys and girls doors into what we called the arena then, which was this large 400-metre track with a rugby pitch in the middle. But I had to get down and get across the arena to safety in my gang's area before the bell stopped ringing, and for all the time getting caught up. But the drummy boys, and sometimes it was up to 50, sometimes it was quite a lot, would be standing outside the boys' door and I would run out the lassies' door. And it just sort of, and you know, I remember what ended up happening. Mr. Don, who became the headmaster long after, they were all trying to fight. They all knew that there was something about me that was good at education. So they were all trying to fight to keep me, but they weren't keeping me, they were keeping my potential, if you know what I mean. So nobody was actually really sitting talking to me about me. But it ended up, the police used to have to then mark the gate. Now, Loch End has a policeman on duty inside, good Christian guy. When it's open, has a policeman on duty full time in there now. But at that time, it was unknown. I mean, you're talking about Glasgow. This wasn't Los Angeles or New York. But Glasgow had to put a policeman on duty at a school gate because of the gang fighting. I can't fight sleep. Do you know what I mean? I just found myself in these ridiculous situations. And
what was the fog one? Because remember there was...
The fog one was, you know, so in the summer, and it makes it sound like we were all about the gang fighting, but in the summer, you got the pictures, we were bored. We really were. So you would go up, and in the Bible, the story of David and Goliath, you know, where you get the Philistines and you get the Israelites up on the side of the hills, and they're all shouting about battle, but there's no really much fighting going on, and Goliath is shouting, I'll take your hard man. It was a bit like that, you know, like where you'd all be shouting about it. So we were all hanging about one night, and it was a very, very, very thick fog, a proper old pea super, as we used to call it. Like you genuinely couldn't see 2 feet in front of you, and there was this like sort of silence, just, you know, I don't know how to describe it, a loud silence, you know, what fog does, and
kind of eerie.
But it was all of a sudden there was this noise came from feet away, and I can still picture when you got up to, there used to be this path that cut across Loch End pitches, and you just seen these people coming from nowhere just running at you, and I've ducked down behind the wall, but I've seen something coming glinting at me, you know, just the way the light caught it, and it smashed off, still got its scar, smashed off my thigh and cut into it, and you know, it's that sort of thing, you look at it and you just go, oh no. But it was mental then, so then we were in, like, this is in sort of Dentoy's gang area where we weren't the fair there, but we thought, but I'm watching guys jumping out of verandas and everything, and it was one of the most absurd and ridiculous scenes I've ever seen in Easterhouse terms, and you know, we laugh and joke about it, but people were hurt that night, and gang fighting in Easterhouse has resulted in a lot of violence. But you are talking about guys who, for the most part, aren't gang fighting. Yeah. So even at that, it was surreal. But in the summer, we would spend the full 6 weeks up these pitches. But that night was surreal, even by Easterhouse gang standards. It was just, like, you know, when you talk to people that were there at that time, it's that like, man, that was mad. You know what I mean? It's like you're back in the moment. And then obviously once the fighting stopped, the police turned up. The police always had this habit of turning up just at the end, you know. And it was like the cavalry in the old cowboy and Indian films. They would always arrive too late. And we just went back down and we hung about in Duntarvie Quad. That was our bit. And we hung about the wall there. And we were just looking. But very quickly then you just go back into your routine of walking around the block, and that was it. There wasn't much else to do. So, aye.
I think what you're saying about the whole boredom thing is interesting, isn't it? That's why a lot of the youth work that we used to do even back in the day these days is trying to engage those guys in something else, and because whenever they are bored, there's nothing else to do. And I mean, you're saying as well, when the communities were built, it was literally, let's just build all the houses out here, but let's forget about other things that might give community. Like, so. There
wasn't even a school built. I mean, my mum moved into a street in Easterhouse. You know, she moved from East End. She was at a White Hill Secondary. That was her school. Even after they moved to Easterhouse when she was a teenager, she had to keep going to White Hill because they'd built all this housing, but they hadn't built any sort of infrastructure until, I think, 1971, 1972. The police station was on a bit of grass in the Rogan Street. It was mental. It was 2 porta cabins. That was the police station. The first social infrastructure they built was Greer's Pub.
Makes sense.
Recipe for disaster for people, you know, working class background. That's all there is to do. And that was it. The sports centre that we have, which was still, you know, we campaigned, or not me personally, because I was too busy getting caught up and running the place down, but people had campaigned for some sort of sports centre for decades. And then Glasgow Life, it wasn't called that then, built the gym just at the back of the doctors, but it was too expensive for locals to use. It's mental.
Which is why, like, so I have a lot of time for people that we've got to know in Barlanark and Easterhouse as well, that local people that fight for that kind of stuff and want to see like infrastructure for the local people to get plugged into, whether that be community centres or even the school on the bridge and stuff up there. Easterhouse there's doing a lot of stuff, which is great. Anyway, let's get back to childhood. So you did mention there that you had a bit of a shine at school, like maybe academically, you know what was going on. So, with primary school, like what was that starting like for you? So, age 5, I guess you're off to.
Actually, I was 4. My birthday's February, so the way that it works in Scotland is, you know, if your birthday's before the 28th or the 29th every 4th year, February, then you go in. So you're going in
What
quite
date
young.
in February is your birthday?
I'm 13th.
I'm
13th of
24.
February. So I was 51 just on Saturday there. Happy birthday to me. And so I was quite young at school. And other than that, I mean, I remember some memories vivid. I remember, you know, being asked in primary 1 to say the word "the," and the teacher sort of humiliating me. Like, oh no, you keep saying it, and you know, in your mind, I'm saying it. I'm saying what you're asking me to say, and all the rest. But my first day was a real temper tantrum for me, because here was my 2-year-old brother being left with my mum. I wasn't happy about that. I felt like I was being abandoned. And it's funny, I could still picture that moment as this 4-year-old being abandoned. And that means Dan's got my mate.
So my eldest son still does the exact same thing whenever he started school. His wee brother's at home, so it wasn't just you.
Yeah, me and Dan developed a history growing up where he knew how to get me in trouble with it, because he was the youngest, you know, he was doing that. But actually not for school. So at that time the schools had, you know, exams at the end of the year to mark performance. It was a normal thing, and we never thought nothing of it. I don't think it scared any of us in the way that it's made out that it would. But I would always come in the top 3. Actually, it was normally always me and Linda Shergold were first or second, taking shots each. Other than one of the years when one of my grandparents died, and I was top 4. But that was great. But even in Easterhouse terms, our family didn't fit. You know, we weren't. Like some of the other ones that did it were probably from more respectable families. There's no other way to describe it. You know what I mean? And so I remember in the start of primary 7, my friend Todd Coster saying to me, he was all excited because he'd been told that he'd been put forward to go and sit the entrance exams for Hutcheson's Grammar in the High School of Glasgow. And
which are private schools.
Private schools. Proper private scholarship. You know, at that time I think the fees were £3,000 a year. They're £13,000 a year now. But proper private, we knew that the standard that you had to pass to get what was the Glasgow City bursary then, which doesn't exist, because we were never going to get the school bursary. That wasn't going to happen. It had to be the Glasgow City one. And so, you know, we threw it. But so I went home all excited, telling my mum, Todd says that they've been put forward for us. So we just assumed, because I'd always been higher placed, that they get it. And my mum says, oh, that's great, they'll tell you tomorrow. And I remember sitting there the next day, and I was quite shy. I was quite, you know, so I wouldn't have approached it. But I remember sitting there all day waiting and the teacher coming and saying, and I didn't, you know, there was nothing said. And I remember going home that day, and my mum's all excited. And she said, so what? And I never says anything. So we must storm down to the school the next day. And she went through them. I mean, she really threatened me. She went, oh no, you know, Mrs. Patterson, that your son, you know, we've only put the top performing. And she went, do you want to look at his grades over a year and tell me that because of 1 year you're justifying it? And my mum, I remember my mum saying, I'll go to the papers. Well, you know, she was going, I'm going to kick up a fuss. And what they actually says was, so it was funny watching like some of the education department and years gone by then trying to take credit for that. And I says, actually, it wasn't the school that put me forward, it was my mum.
And you think that's because they thought you didn't fit?
I didn't fit. They didn't think I'd fit into that setting. Maybe they were proved right, but actually maybe if it's like this funny thing with school, you know, the Scottish Government talks about get it right for every child. There's a couple of times I've had to go to toe with the Scottish Government on behalf of my own kids where they're saying, you're failing that. You're still treating them generically rather than as individuals in their own right and what's right for them. But that's because I've learned when to open my mouth. Then I didn't. And so, went off for the exams. It's totally naive, totally oblivious, you know, other than going down the water, which is what we did for holidays, you know, down to Saltcoats and Helensburgh and things like that. The only holiday we'd ever had experienced was Butlins in 1979. That was it. Yeah. So I'd never really experienced life outside the scheme. And so got that. And it was funny because I did a radio interview with Stephen Jardine. He was the first person that says to me, what was your first day at Hutcheson's like? And it must have been so nondescript first day that it just didn't enter into me that it was Hutcheson's I got full bursary there, but I never get the books, which is important for what unfolded.
And there was a bit in the book where your dad took you the day, because you must have been 12?
11. No, I was 11.
I couldn't believe this. There's no way I could do my kid this these days.
It wouldn't happen these days, but that's a good point. So, but that's how it was, you know. What you're talking about is my very first day as a pupil going to sit the exams. And my granddad Patterson died, you know, that at that point, but they didn't tell me till after I'd sat the Hutchison's one, because they says my granddad didn't want me to know. I know it was one of the things we want to talk about. My grandparents were everything to me, especially my granddad. In those early years, he was everything. He treated me normal, or even more so. My cousin that was brought up as my uncle, his mum died early, was the only person through my childhood and teens that spoke to me as a normal person, rather than speaking at me over what they thought. And I get told that, but the very first day, that was it. Remember, my dad got me up, 2 buses across the city, dark o'clock in the morning, even in August, 2 buses across the city, picked me up that day, and then that was it. I had to make my own way. And it was funny, I was talking to one of my old school friends on Messenger today, and we were saying about train, because I got the train across here the day, and I said, man, I hate trains. And they said, but it was part of life then. I says, no, I think for me, going around the underground, I says, I became an expert in the underground when I stopped going. But it was nondescript first year. First year was all right, but I very quickly started to lie. Because, they're talking about coming for these fancy houses in Newton Mearns and Bearsden. I was fair talk flat in Easterhouse. And so I was immature. I might have been intelligent, but I was very immature, and I didn't know how to deal with that other than feel probably guilt that I'd never had it. And there's a lot of stuff that's instilled into you in Easterhouse from those that should know better, that you're unaware of it, but the words they used. So the socialising that was going on in my life through the school, etc., and the social construction that had been going on in my life. Us church people hate those terms, but as part of it, they created this thing about nearly where, as kids, we were taught when you move it to nearly be ashamed that you came for a scheme. And yet, actually, community-wise, it was fantastic. But so I never became really aware of this stuff till first year started going on. But my first day in first year, sitting in, I think it was one of these things, funny enough, talking about details, I can't even remember now if it was history or English. And the teacher's asking us what schools we went to, and I says, Blairtummock Primary School. I remember her name, Mrs. McConaughey. And she went, Blairtummock Primary! And I said, she went, I used to teach in that. She'd done a probationary in that school. So it's these days where as adults we look through it and go, that's a God thing, preparing the way for us. So that was my first day there, was a teacher that knew Blairtummock, and she was so loving and talked about fond memories. So that was a good start, but it was pretty much all downhill from
there. So there was, you got to the end of first year. It was when did it all unravel?
Well, first year you're in Kingar Street, which was the primary building. So you did first year. So second year you moved over to Beaton Road, which is a far newer building. You're in with the older kids and all the rest of it. But I remember during that summer saying to my mum, so we didn't get bursary for the books, and it was about £300 even in the 80s for the books. So I remember having a comment, Mum, I need all those books because I don't know when I'll need them. She went, no, we'll get them. You get notes, we'll get them as you go. And I remember going in, Mr. Strang, I don't know what it is about English teachers, but they always seem to be very alpha male type, even when they're female. And it's like nearly their presence demands respect and fear. And so he says, okay, next week you need Of Mice and Men. We're going to start in that. And I remember just at that moment the panic and fear, because I knew I didn't have it. I also knew that money was tight. And so I remember then making my way back across the city and having to try and work up the courage to say, Mum, I'm going to need to get this. And I know that a lot of young people listening might not get the idea. There was no Amazon, there was no next day delivery. You know what I mean? So it wasn't even about a money thing, it was actually finding out how to and where to get it. And so worked my way up, got up, and I've got there up it's like 2 sets of stairs where the third floor and a 3 high tenement block. And as I walked in the door, my mum and dad are arguing about money. And I just remember going, no, I'm not mentioning it. So when it came around the following Friday to go to English, into Glasgow Central Station, bank of phones, funnily enough, are still there halfway along the platforms. And I picked up the phone and phoned the school and pretended it was my dad. My voice hadn't broken yet, but because they're not expecting like a 12-year-old boy to phone and pretend, there was no questions asked. And I just says I wasn't well. And I carried that on, just missing the Fridays for 6 weeks. But then when they started to question it, it began to get, wider and all the rest of it. But one of the things that they assumed was, so Hutchison's was set up in teaching groups according to academic ability. There was 7. I was in teaching group 3, so I was quite a good achiever. They assumed that I wasn't going because I was struggling with the work. All they had to do was check my work and see there was no struggle in it. I was good at it and getting good grades. So they assumed that, so they moved me down to teaching group 6, which, you know, so you can imagine as a kid already being ashamed of where I came from. No reason to be ashamed of Easterhouse, but that was how I had allowed myself to feel there. So when they moved me down to teaching group 6, I was like, that's it, I'm not drunk. And so I missed about 3 or 4 months straight.
And you said you used to just travel the underground?
Yeah, travelled the underground. The only time I was challenged was actually on a train. And a conductor says to me, because even at that time in the 80s, children weren't supposed to be unoccupied during school time, and unaccompanied, sorry. Conductor says to me, I'm seeing you on here a lot, you alright? So instead of going with a big bag of books over my shoulder, I had a change of clothes. I'd go into the toilets in Glasgow Central Station and get changed, and then I'd go out. But the underground, I knew the 15 stops, I'd get off and I'd explore, because I had my trans card. I'd get off and I'd explore. But it really was such a meaningless, every day it was counting down the minutes to when it was safe to go. But I still had to watch, because kids from Hutchison's would be getting some of the trains, and I had to avoid that.
And how did you get found out? Like, did your mum clock it?
Well, it ended up that the school made an issue of it, that I hadn't been attending, and there was all this. So, and I remember clearly Mr. Percy, who was a PE teacher, trying to fight my battle for me again, but there was nobody sitting talking to me and saying what's going on. And I'm not saying that I would have answered, but there just wasn't any attempt to speak to me. It was always about me, and there was always an assumption of what was going on. I mean, it's mental to think it was over a stupid book of Mice and Men, funnily enough.
And you're proud to think, sure, that wouldn't happen today, but
it does.
The whole thing of not listening to where the folk are at, I'm sure it definitely happens. Just assumptions. And
I'm part of a couple of groups in the University of Strathclyde, and actually one of the things that we did, I had some teachers getting back to me and saying, no, you know what, that we thought that day was gone, but some teachers getting back to me and saying, no, sorry to say, it still goes on, and it goes on a lot more than we think, where it's about assuming what's going on in the kid's life, but not actually sitting down and talking to them, even though that's supposed to be how it's conducted now. So yeah, it's heartbreaking.
So you moved back, Hutchie, you're back in Easterhouse, Loch End, is that where you...
To go to Loch End, because there was no way in this earth that I was going to Westwood, because all the hooligans went to Westwood, and you know, and so I had to go to Loch End quite grudgingly. So yeah, and that was mental. I remember one of the boys there who sort of was one of the leaders of one of the gangs having a go at me, and the prefect grabbing him, and he got expelled, and I just thought, oh, no, because obviously that's not going to help me. But then we come to the summer, so it's the end of third year. So the start of third year, 6 weeks into third year, I left Hutchison's, went to Loch End. And even academically wise, I found myself in Loch End through all the classes, sitting repeating what I'd done first year in Hutchison's. So far ahead were they in their teaching skill. And Loch End was good, but you can imagine what it's like, you're sitting repeating stuff that you already knew as a kid. It was very boring. I remember even a French intern from France getting me into trouble thinking I was taking the mickey, because in French class, and I enjoyed French and I was good at it then, but I would use a French accent because that's how we talk. And they thought I was taking the mickey and used to keep putting me out of the class. I remember thinking, don't speak to me. You know, don't assume. I was the least likely to cause trouble, but there you go. But no, I couldn't last. So the day you're talking about, you mentioned earlier, so Duntarvie Quad, Easterhouse Quad, there was what we called the drum and milk float, right? Which was a milk float and did deliver milk, but it was also used to try and come down, because we would do these raiding parties into each other's gang areas. I know it's mental, but so there was this one day, middle of the summer holiday. Actually, it wasn't the middle, it was the end, because it was like the Saturday before we went back to school. They'd been down collecting money for the milk run, and we'd seen them, and this almighty battle started. I mean, it was crazy, and there's kids playing, but it was crazy, and there must have been 40 or 50 involved in this massive street fight. And I think I've had a brick or a boat or something on him running, and the next thing I felt the grab of the hair, my ma pulling me at the middle of this gang fight, saying, you have to go to school, Raymond, Monday, you're flipping idiot. The language is a wee bit more colourful.
That's a polite way to say that.
But she pulled me right out of that. So I lasted a couple of days at the start of and I just, as mum, I can't go here, I need to go to Westwood. I thought, I'm going to get killed. Yeah. And it would have been. And so that was mental.
And then, so it was mid-teens onwards that you started have dabbling in some of the kind of stuff that you got to bother with addiction-wise. Things like, what was the transition there?
Well, I'd already sort of started that, because you're looking for, so that days, you know, DVD, it wasn't DVDs, it was VHSs, there wasn't a shop in Easterhouse, it was Duke Street. So because I had the travel card, I was the one that would go and pick the movies and sort of things out, because I had the trans card, didn't cost money. There was guys that came around the movies in their boot, you know what I mean? But I would be the one that was sent there. But on the way to get the bus, I'd see some of the local guys that I'd already sort of knew, but I'd stand and talk to them. And it was great. I was actually talking about this in a university thing the other day. It was great because there was no judgmentalism or anything like that with these guys, and it was just fun to hang out with. Some of them were sniffing glue. I tried it twice, didn't like it. Just wasn't my thing. But they would be, so they would be smoking hash and things like that, and go, here, do you want to? And you would do it, but you weren't, and they were like, you're mental, why are you even doing that? You're you know what I mean? So that was while I was still at Hutchie, that started. And then you'd be taking some of the wine, but no really getting caught up. But as I moved on then into Loch End, that became more, because you're just looking for it, because obviously you can imagine in the house it was like there was a lot of tension, when you think, that aimed at you because you were new at Westwood, what a failure. And so you would just hang out with these guys because there was none of that. Mm-hmm. And it really was just a bunch of local guys that just hung out, would build dens, would make fires, would break into empty houses because we didn't realise that was wrong, to get the wood to build the dens and make the fires and things like that. And it wasn't really malice or mischievous, and it was funny because those days, the early teens, but somebody was saying about this about burglary or Danish, but in those days it was non-existent, because as much as there was a bunch of guys that get caught on that, nobody would dare, because they would get battered. Right. And we really did protect not just our own but anybody there. And people say, like, Easterhouse must have been a terrifying place to live, but it's one of these funny things. If you weren't involved in the gangs, it wasn't an issue. Don't get me wrong, it'd be intimidating walking up the quad and there's a bunch of 20 guys sitting there that all stop because you're coming to stare. Yeah. But as soon as he's no for Drummer there, that's all right. And so it was kind of mental, but that was how I drifted into that. Was it that? I left school at 5th. I didn't get seriously into drugs, even though I was dabbling. It was kind of funny how it came about. So my first job, YTS Butcher, I'm sitting in geography in 5th year when it sort of struck me, okay, I can leave, because the age thing meant you couldn't leave to Christmas in 5th year because my birthday was February. And I remember sitting there, so it had all been wrote out. I was doing my hires, I was doing certificate of 6-year studies as it was then as well. I remember sitting there one day and going, oh, I can leave. And it was that simple and that sudden, and I left. And I got a job as a YTS butcher, and I'd heard people talking about this drug, acid, right? And I remember I was getting curious about it, and I was going with a lassie for one of the other gangs there. It only lasted a couple of weeks. One of the big things that came out as well as working the butcher, I was walking up the road one night because my mad always taught me you had to do these things, and they all jumped me and battered me. Right? I mean, they all set about me. I'm walking up the road. But the funny thing was, it was a guy on his own the night before had seen me walking her up that had went and got all the rest of him. And we just need a gang to jump me. I can't fight it. But it ended up, it was these guys that was supplying the acid. So all of a sudden, it was when I began to see a change because they heard I was wanting it. And I'm thinking, I'm buying half of yours. Yeah. But it meant I could go up there because they had moved into drug dealing, and that was bigger than the gangs. You know what I mean? And that was a real big downfall for me, because I could go up to get acid and none of the rest of them could. It meant I could start putting a wee bit on the drugs to recompense me. And it was amazing how many of my mates get annoyed at me doing it. I said, but you do the same, I've got to pay for mine somehow. And so that would be it. And that was that then. So I did work as a YTS butcher, done 6 months as a butcher. As soon as the 6 months was up, it was at the door, next one please. It really was like that. I was good at the butchers, absolutely loved it. I got my 2 only experiences as a 16-year-old to escape Easterhouse.
Isn't there that down
Northampton and Southampton, funnily enough, or Brockenhurst. And it was brilliant, and it was normal teenage life. And it's only now that you really experience that. I never experienced anything that my daughters are getting to experience now. It really wasn't. I'm no, apologising or pity me for it, but it helps me understand a lot when I see some young guys that's gone through that, they know you understand that. They're not gone through normal experiences that we need to mature. And so I got the 2 escapes, but I just get caught up in that side of the drugs. And it was never about making money. I loved the buzz and the lifestyle. Absolutely loved it, which was my downfall. When it came to drugs, I ended up at times I was taking up to 7 LSD a day. It was another world. It was an alternate universe. There's no way you're in it. Take speed. When you take any upper, you're also start then taking other drugs like temazepam and that for the doona to get asleep and fighting it. And you would sit and have these incredible conversations with other guys that was stoned, kind of mental, but you really would sit and philosophise about some of the greatest stuff going on. And but it was such an escape from what was normal life in a scheme. Or our normal life, bear in mind, there's still a lot of, more than 24,000 of these kids are not involved in this at all. But it was once I was in it, that was it. And it's that the West of Scotland thing I always took as much as I could as fast as I could to get stoned as I could, which meant swallowing, or even when I started on speed snorting, it wasn't enough for me. I had to, so very, very quickly I moved on into injecting before, all this was in my 16th. Such a massive decline just in my 16th year.
And how, so you talk a little bit about how that changed your personality or changed you as a person, because I guess it just numbs you, does it? You just kind of become so focused on yourself that
you don't even think about it in those terms. You think about it in the terms of getting your next fix. So you still hung out with other guys. But I think I seen myself even more as a loner in a crowd and feeling very, very different. Now, the reality is that as you come to faith, you begin to understand that everybody sort of feels that way anyway. But it's one of the great lies and tricks of the devil is that you feel you're the only one experiencing that, so you don't talk about it and you withdraw more and more into yourself. And it became about getting the next fix or the next buzz out of the lifestyle. But I had some really, really good friends, and we did have a lot of good times, which is part of the problem. Drug addiction isn't always a train spotting, vision of it where it's all madness and chaos, because otherwise we wouldn't keep coming back after it. It was the lifestyle around it, the hanging out, the drives to
It's still part of
Edinburgh.
that community, isn't it? It's the community of people who are using for sure, but there's still that sense of we're here together.
It was quite a strong community, especially those early days, the teen years, when once heroin hit Easterhouse, because heroin wasn't part of Easterhouse, even the drug dealers kept it out, because they didn't want the heat that it would bring for the police, so they were quite happy. It was like things like Temgesic, which was a pharmaceutical morphine-based painkiller, which is what we took for years, and things like that. But it was quite a good community as well. We hadn't started ripping each other off or anything like that. We sat and we got high together, we got stoned together, we sat in hussies together. The gang fighting became a bit less then. I watch a lot of agencies taking credit for killing the gangs. They didn't. Drugs killed the gangs. Because more people got, like me, copped on to the fact, it's one of these pet hates I have. More people like me copped on to the fact, if I'm fighting them, I can't go and score. Yeah. I need to score drugs more than I need to fight them. And as that became more prevalent, the gang fighting by its very nature tailed away, because you started to be pals with the guys that you used to be trying to hit with baseball bats. So, but it came a more insular world.
And so would all of your friends at that point, all of your community be hanging out with people you'd all be using together?
No community outside the guys that was taking drugs. And most of them had a fear of my dad, so whereas a lot of the other houses we could go to those houses, nobody came to mine. Nobody would even come up and chat at my door. So there was always that where I had to make sure, as much as I could, that life was separated from home life. You know what I mean? Because what the consequences of the two coming together would be unthinkable.
Which is we'll get on maybe in another part if it's too long, but how we minister in that. But one of the things we've always been saying is that because that's the case, if we want to see someone come out of that, you need to be a community for them, don't you? Because you can't just be like, well, that's fine, stop taking drugs and come here on a Sunday morning and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I've had some good conversations with pastors on that very thing, where they'll say, I remember a few years ago, I won't mention the church because we're all on a journey learning to deal with it, but we're all broken to different degrees. But it was about, well, how do we get them to stop coming in stoned on a Sunday? And I was like, well, sorry, why? And they're upsetting people. I said, well, tell the people it's getting upset to find another church. Because that was, I hadn't really learned grace in my conversations at that point, but it was the truth that was right. So well, if you want to reach out to the broken, they don't have the capacity to come straight. They don't have the capacity. I bet surely they can trust God. And I says, well, maybe the question you should be asking your congregation is, surely they should be trusting God to be able to deal with them. And I says, it's a journey. I says, and as that goes on, we call it discipleship, but you can't tell someone that's just wandered into a church, here's what we're going to do, we're going to teach you and train you to walk in righteousness, because it's so frightening to somebody whose only thought through their whole addiction has been, that's why my book's called Completing the Tenor, how do I get my next fix? It's so alien to them. But what you need to do is show them something that's far more worthwhile, and if that means you have to shut up the moaning minis and the moaning maxis at the back, then and it's churches have to decide if they want to reach the most broken, there's a cost associated with it. And it's a cost, not in the terms of the finances that's involved in it, but in the terms of how you're going to upset people who just want to come to church and sing songs on a Sunday.
And I think that's great. We'll get onto that as well. So you're kind of mixed up in that. What is your relationship with your family like at that stage then?
I think we were all in, if we speak it out, it's real. Mm-hmm. But I was arrested for drugs when I was 18. So that, And those years, I was getting arrested left, right and centre for things like getting caught with offensive weapons and breaches of the peace. You know, the police's cure-all for anybody they couldn't actually jail anybody for. And by the way, just so Police Scotland know, some of the young guys wore it as a badge of honour the way they do ASBOs. It didn't have the effect you thought it would have. So the family life was becoming broken. I mean, I distanced myself into, I didn't mix. I never sat in the sitting room. We used to always, my mum would always family dinner at 5:30. Every, tenement house we had a dining table in the sitting room because you had no dining room. My room, that was it. I'd come home from work, I'd be in my room, then I'd go out, get drugs and hang out and do what we're doing, and then I'd come back at night, I'd go into my room and I'd a catch on my door, my room door was locked, excuse me, and that was my life. I just, in that sense of interaction didn't happen. Just to sort of maybe sum up that part was Christmases, because one of my first blog posts was a tale of 3 Christmases, and where it was a kid in that memory of mum and dad taking me down the bars and that all excitement about picking my present, a scale electric set in the window, and how exciting that was to Christmas. If I wasn't working, I was in my room, and that was it, and I wasn't coming out. And one Christmas in particular where my sister's hammering on the door all the way, and sweeties were on top of the wardrobe and all that in my room, and I wasn't interested in interaction to my first Christmas in the Into Teen Challenge. And how uncomfortable but life-changing that actually was, because it was uncomfortable that first Christmas in a Christian environment, you know what I mean? But that probably sums up how the addiction side had went. And I had tried to come out, I'd done methadone twice. First time it was because I discovered if I says the right words to the drug counsellor, they would tell my doctor to give me drugs. And again, I've had conversations with people in charge of drug policy in Glasgow since then, and they don't get that addicts are manipulative and want stuff for nothing. Yeah. They don't get it. But I remember the woman that was in charge at that time of drugs policy in Glasgow. She used to be my social worker and my drug worker. And she says, but you were always hanging around. I says, that's because I knew if I says the right things, you'd phone my doctor. I says, how many urine tests did I fail, and yet I still kept getting my prescription? And she looked shocked, and I says, you're going to have to grab a hold of the fact you're working with manipulative people that are always going to get what they want and let you think it's your idea. Okay. The second time I was more serious, I'd done methadone for 12 months, started off on 10 months, started off in 80 mil, and every 2 weeks I was cut down 5 mil. Easterhouse Health Centre, still the same fantastic lady that works there, that was there when I go in for my brother's prescription, talk to her. But I ended up, I was down to 2 mil. I never touched another drug the second time I was on it. They put it into a funnel so it would look, but I was as addicted on the 2 mil as I was on 80, because nobody was teaching me how to live beyond addiction. There was no scope of it. And I remember phoning my counsellor the day after I'd just done that, and he says, what is it? And I says, right, I'm finished now, what do I do now? And he says, what do you mean? I says, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, my life's revolved around my next fix. Methadone's been my next fix, what do I do now? I was working, I was in security with all the carnage that broke, but I was working. I had more of a semblance of a functioning addict, in the sense I wasn't going about and sticking needles in for heroin or anything like that at that time. But they had no answers for me. There was nothing that could fill the void. So I did the only thing I knew, which was up to my mate. He sold heroin, so obviously it was a mate, and bought a bag of heroin. Because I was so deflated, and it's hard to get across the sense of, you think you're close to victory. You think that you're getting there, and that last fix is going to be this sense of euphoria, to be presented with a nothingness. No coping mechanisms, it's one area where train spotting and everyone else gets it bang on, in the scene where the baby dies and the mother goes and has a fix. And I remember people being shocked by it, but that's how we do it. If you won the lottery, you go and have a fix. If your mother died, you go and have a fix. There is no other way of doing life other than that. And I was so deflated that day when they had nothing in the sense of life to offer me. And it went rapidly downhill after that. I mean, really badly. Worse than it had ever been. I was so fed up. And then so it ended, as you said in your 30-second clip, of a gun in the back of your back. How did all that unravel? Security companies, I started off very good one, Ballarnock Community Business, Art Security, really good business, ran really well, made a difference to East End people like myself, worked with them. But more and more gangsters began to be involved in the security scene, the very territorial thing, and I was working for a company, and 2 guys who were newbies on the scene but wanted to prove they were as hard as some of the real hardcore gangsters that was there. So through a whole load of nonsense, they assumed I was stealing off one of the sites. It was actually quite a good gap. They assumed I was stealing off one of the sites. Didn't know anything this at the time, but they've picked me up late on the Friday night, got me in the car. I didn't even cop on when they told me to sit in the front seat. You know, the reason for that was something like, I need to get out first. So then they've took me out to an agricultural show and we're sitting in the car. So there had been some sort of conversations, but there had been no change in the atmosphere or anything. And it really was out of the blue where all of a sudden I'm feeling this ramming into my back. And the guy behind me, he started cursing and swearing, it's effing jammed. And I'm like, so I'm aware my bag's there, right? And things have changed. When I go to the site, the first thing I did was off to the toilets to have a fix. That was it. And that's what I'm thinking. Wait a minute, it's mental to think, here's a guy shouting and cursing about a gun, and how am I going to get out of this? You know, no, because my life's in threat, but I need a fix. Yeah. And so we're gone, and it's like my move kicked into gear, and I couldn't even tell you the words I says, but it was like, and so what had happened was there was a serious de-escalation of the situation, but that's because I had flipping heroin and a set of works in the, and it really was that. And they've took me to this building site. It was actually an office building in Wellington Street, still there. It was in the finishing stages. And I know it sounds mental, and people have said to me since, how do you know how the gun's loaded? I don't. And I wasn't, you're not asking, and it doesn't matter what. I wasn't, it was like a badly written movie. A couple of weeks before, one of the boys for the area, never done anything wrong, had a gun stuck, and he's mouthed by them. So the threat was real, the gun was real, and all the rest of it. But they dropped me off on this site with this other garden this Friday night. And that was it, we'll be back to see you in the morning, or you better not go anywhere, sort of stuff. And I'm like, and it was still so surreal, but it was so surreal that I've stopped thinking about the fix. And I never says to this guy, you want a cup of coffee? There's not, no, I've got coffee because I always had coffee in my bag. That was it. Your bag had your wee TV monitor, your works with your drugs in it, your coffee, your cup, your milk, and your Weetabix and your pot noodle. That was it.
That's all you need.
But every day was the same, excuse me. And I've got some guy says to this guy, you want a cup of coffee? I said, I've got coffee here. Aye, but don't give me any more than 3 grains, because any more than that's too strong. I remember, what? and looked at him, and I think that probably shook me more than getting a gun. So I'm on a building site with a flipping maniac. But I left the site very early that morning. I says, mate, I'm just going up to the shop, and that was it. And I went back, and a whole series of events. But that Monday, that was a Saturday, that Monday, I was put in touch with a pastor for the that worked with Teen Challenge.
Right, so hopefully part 1. It's probably been 4 hours, but I've been loving this, so I don't even know what time it is, Pete. So
50 minutes.
There you go.
Wow.
Part
Sorry.
2, yeah, no, it's good. So part 2 is so obviously you've painted a picture there of just despair and brokenness and mess that your life was. I also love how through the book you've consistently said, this is my fault. I've made choices. It's not like, yes, you've been dealt a brutal hand in many ways, but also this is my fault. Like that's true. That's not what you're saying. There's a sense of ownership, certainly. Yeah,
and it's part of, obviously, Scotland is facing a drugs crisis, a drugs epidemic that's worse than I've ever experienced. I do remember when I was growing up, the figures that year was something like 51, but I knew 31 of them. But I think there's one of the problems we have just now is enabling addicts by making them the poor victims. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about what causes the person to turn to drugs. And you see somebody going, I've heard the story of Andy Murray and Dunblane and how one boy ended up with child pornography, whereas Andy Murray ends up, number 1 tennis champ. We're different, it's different people. But I think there's too much of allowing addicts to be victims instead of saying, look, ultimately, you're still responsible for choosing to react by taking drugs. And I had always set out that I wanted to show that I was responsible, regardless and irrespective of what's going on about me. I was responsible for how I reacted, because that's reacting to circumstances, no responding, which is what discipleship's about. Yeah. But I reacted to the circumstances in a very negative manner, which was never ever going to get me out. It was only going to ever make the circumstances worse.
Like I don't know if you read the Ed Welch addictions books, The Banquets in the Grave. No. It was really helpful for me. He would talk about it as any addiction, so not just drugs, we're all addicts of something, but as like voluntary slavery. Yeah. So it's that sense that there was a choice there, but there comes a point when you're just enslaved to all the choices you've made, all the situations you're in, and it's like, how on earth do I get out of this now? I thought that was
I'd agree with that. And I know what you get certain organisations working with people in addiction and life controlling problems, and they'll call it a disease. And so I'm very careful. Again, these are people on the outside looking in, and we want to blame circumstances other than our own participation in it. You know what I mean? We're in the middle of a pandemic, whether you agree with the government responses and how to deal with it or not, it's neither here nor there, but we're giving ways to lessen the impact on both ourselves and others. And addiction is the same. The problem is that why you're enslaving yourself, it's like the old biblical talking about a bondservant, a slave that's been set free but then chooses to submit back to the master. And that is what you're doing. It's that willingly. And you do it for something as simple as chasing after the next fix. And one of the best examples I can give, we'll come back to, but to start, when I was in Teen Challenge, after I'd been there, completed the programme, I was involved in the ministry team at Go to Churches. And I remember probably meeting about 400 or 500, in the congregation. And I'm listening to one after another of them coming up with these different reasons of why they took drugs. And I remember thinking, I was a preacher that night, and I remember thinking, I don't know about you, but I can't relate to anything they've said. Now, for some of them, it was very genuine. They had been through horrific circumstances in their childhood. I says, I can't relate to any of them. I took drugs because I wanted to. Every single fix I took because I chose to take it. I was a slave to it, but I was still a willing participant. And if I was to take heroin tomorrow, it would be because I wanted to. I says, and here's the thing you don't hear many people saying. I enjoyed being stoned. I loved it. I would walk. I walked from the shopping centre, now the Locks shopping centre, across what was basically a piece of grassland with trees, which is now Glasgow Fort, up to Garthamlock to score a bag of heroin in minus 20 degrees in a t-shirt because I wanted what was on. And it's amazing. We'll walk across hot coals. We'll walk across the city to get what we want. It's such an overwhelming compulsion. And I know that experts, and I'm doing that deliberately because apparently I'm not an expert in it. I know this by some of the conversations that was going on last year. I'm not an expert. I have lived in experience. So I don't know what I'm talking about. And I know that experts will say, yeah, that's part of the neurology. Yeah, that's right. You're rewiring your brain. It's the shortcut for the reward system. But the great thing is, as we know, is there is a way for your brain to be rewired again. If you've rewired it once to bypass the body's reward system, it can be done again, which is what addiction is. You're taking a body's natural response to reward hard work. You're using drugs to bypass it. And so what it means is, what we don't want to do is go back to the hard way of feeling the euphoria of the body's reward system. We want to take the easy way out. Yeah.
So how did then that change come about? So if the first part was how you kind of get into that, what changed and what led you to Teen Challenge and kind of started you on the journey out of that?
Well, God's a better manipulator than me. It's as simple as that. So my friend, who sadly passed away a few years ago, had been in the Haven, Kilmacolm, which was under Teen Challenge at that time, for 6 weeks, about 6 months before at Christmas, but he'd left. And so they lived next door to us, so we're still in tenements, we're in Ervitt Street at this point. And my mum said, so on the Sunday, so the Saturday is the day that I quit my job, and I've always said, your boss wants to shoot you, it's time to quit. On the Sunday, caught up with some stuff, but I promised my mum, in trying to get the tenner, that was it. I wasn't getting back, I'd had enough and all that. Again, whatever it takes to get the money. Excuse me. And then, so on the Monday though, my mum says, right, come on. So my words had caught me out. So she says, phone your counsellor. And I phoned my counsellor, and I think, that was great because I knew how to play my counsellor. And but I never got an answer. And my mum says, well, I might go to Jeannie next door for that place Jim was. And I'm just thinking, so what's going on is, yeah. But it's like the sat-nav in my mind is trying to work out. I had a £5 because I bought Valium on the Sunday rather than heroin, which allows you to get asleep but you still feel the withdrawal. So I'm like, all right, she does that. I just need to pretend that I'm on this so that I can somehow get a £5, right?
Because you need a tenner, you need to complete
I need the tenner, I need to complete the tenner. That was my whole thought. So I would be sitting in a conversation like this. I would know how much I had in my pocket and I would know how much I needed. And that was what every conversation was about. How do I complete the tenner? And so she went next door to Jeannie and she came back in and says, oh, was she no in? She says, no, she says she's going to have a look for it. So the next time she comes in with this card and it said, I'll never forget, Pastor Ken Prasad. She's an Assemblies of God pastor, but he also worked alongside Teen Challenge, but his church was in Castlemilk, another scheme. So my mum says, you want phoning? I'm like, I'm not phoning, I don't know how to deal with this. No addict likes to feel that the circumstance, so we're talking about slavery, but no addict likes to feel that the journey to getting the money is getting out of control. It's quite uncomfortable. Anything, outside the norm. I could see 4 weeks into my future because I knew what every day was going to look like, right? So this was a bit out of my comfort zone, and I was a wee bit troubled by it. So, no, my youth phoned, I'm 27-year-old, Mama's having to make these calls for me. Do you know what I mean? But she phoned, the guy dropped everything. He was there, I think this was like 9:30, 10:15 in the morning. He was there by 11 o'clock. So we're sitting in the living room, and in the house, and Ken says, you want your parents to be here? And I'm like, aye, because I'm wanting them to see that I'm playing the part here. And my dad's like, no, I'm going to leave you to it. And I'm like, this isn't, and I used to remember the old sat-navs when they just came out at first and you took a wrong turn and say at the bottom, recalculating, and you'd see you got 50,000 routes for a 2-mile journey, and that's my brain's working out. I'm short-circuiting here. How do I figure this out? So he's talking away and blah, 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 and telling me that he's making all these promises about getting me into rehab, and the Teen Challenge bus, which had always sat outside the Needle Exchange, which was in Health Centre. I went on it once. I was in a terrible state at this point. My skin was all broken, hair was away out there, I had a beard away down there. This beard is a wee bit better groomed than it was then. I wouldn't even change my socks. Anything that got in the way for me waking up and going and looking for money, I couldn't be annoyed with. And I'm sitting here, and he's saying all this stuff, and it's sort of going in, and it's no. But I heard him say, we're going to try and get you into rehab in 7 days. I didn't know at that time the Teen Challenge journey was 6 weeks, and having to show up at the bus. Didn't know any of that. But I'm just sitting thinking, how can I work this? So he went away, and I have to be honest, I wasn't that bad after he left. My mum's sitting talking and making plans, and I'm just thinking, I need to get that's what I'm thinking. But I started to get very agitated. It wasn't even that my body was strung out. It should have been. I hadn't had any heroin since the Saturday. This was Monday. I had never gone a day without in years. And so, but it was like it was like a psychological craving at that point. I've not had, I need to have. Mm-hmm. And my mum said, do you want me to phone that guy? It was out the day. And it was like, the sat-nav kicks in. That's it. We've got a route. Aye, because I'm thinking, I'll get him to tell my ma to give me a tenner and all that, right? And that was in the good old days when the phone was out in the hall on the phone table. So my ma phoned them first. Shockingly embarrassed, but she phoned them first. And I came onto the phone. And you know what? It's funny, because all the times I've talked about what happened next, I forgot about this part. Ken was up, he's pastor in Notting Hill Community Church in London now. But he came up on the 20th anniversary and told me, I says, you come onto the phone, he says, and says, you're all right. He says, I can't do that, this is too hard. He says, you're doing all that. I says, I don't remember that. For some of the, people say you get amazing memory. It's amazing what we choose to forget. But I'll never forget what he did say to me was, can I pray for you? Never tried to counsel me, never tried to calm me down or anything. He just says, can I pray for you? And I can't remember a word of what he prayed. And I'm quite glad I can't remember, because I'd probably try and pray with every addict the same prayer. But I'll never forget that I can remember clearly. I can picture even the wallpaper. I says thanks, hung up the phone, walked into the sitting room. So there's my mum, my dad and my sister. And I says, oh, I'm sorry, right? And my dad went, heard it all before, because you had. And my mum went, no, look at him, he's different. No, I'm not feeling different, I'm not thinking different. I'm oblivious to the fact that I'm not thinking I need a fiver. Mm-hmm. I'm totally oblivious to that. But it was to the point like an hour later, and it was Ken again when he was up, he says, do you not remember calling me back an hour later? I says, no. He says, no. He says, your mum made you phone me back an hour later because you were all right. And I thought, well, my mum's no patronising or anything like that. So, and I remember then, so once, it's like memory how there. So what had happened was, I was so all right that my mum says, no, I phone that guy back and tell him you're all right. Now, only an hour after that. And I went, nah, man, I don't want to waste his time. Do you know what I mean? She says, I think you should phone him and tell him you're all right. And I was like, don't be stupid. And I phoned him. And he says, I'm going to get Roy Lees to come out and see you tomorrow night. He says, Roy, the bus will be there on Tuesday night. I'm going to get Roy to come out and see you. But it was so surreal, because I had stopped thinking about getting a fix. But I'd stopped thinking to the point I wasn't aware, obviously, that I stopped thinking about it. Roy Lees came out to see him the Tuesday night. Talked about this last year, Susan Halley. I didn't know Susan, but I knew her brother and I knew her dad. Her brother was the guy I had most recently hung out with doing drugs. One of the nicest guys you would ever meet. So he was telling me, Susan went in a year ago, she's doing really well. And I'm thinking, oh, that's where she went, right? And that was the first spark of, well, all right, if this works, then, because I'd never done rehab. And I thought, all right, we'll have a think about this. And so the next day, the Wednesday, I remember, beautiful, it was May, it was beautiful. And I thought, that's really nice, I'm going to go a walk, no thinking like my family are in Tenterhooks here. And I remember saying, now, only 2 weeks before I'm in my sister's house, down the road, and I'm trying to get money, and I remember I was going to jump through the window when they had tried to do an intervention in bare feet, right, because they were trying to stop me getting out. So this was only a couple of weeks before. And I remember when my sister says, you get that door, don't come back, I just went, all right then. And I just sat down, just got a cup of tea. I know it's mental, because it's not the normal experience for people.
I think that was God then?
Oh, absolutely, but I'm not aware. Nobody's preached the gospel. Ken never preached the gospel to me, just offered to pray. And it goes against a lot of how we think we're supposed to act. We forget that God is much bigger and sees the end from the beginning in it. God knew what that weekend was going to be like for me. And so the Thursday, which was my dad's birthday, we've forgotten all about it, never made a fuss, I reckon. Ken shows up 12 o'clock in a white car, and that was it. Says our goodbyes, get into the car, and never forget, I've looked and there was a sense in me, I'm not coming back. It was just that sort of, and it wasn't, it wasn't all melodramatic or anything like that, it was just, I'm not coming back. I was sort of knew it. And then Ken says, do you mind if I put some Christian music on? And I'm looking at him, I'm like, and it was, churches, we had a fantastic minister the early years, John Cook. I used to always think he was drunk. I only found out recently he had a hearing impairment, so he spoke. Like quite a heavy thing. Brilliant minister, loved in the community, but I'm still thinking about the church organ and tambourine and that sort of thing. And he put on, and I think it was Hillsongs, but this would have been Hillsongs like 1990 style. It was brilliant. I remember sitting going, well, that's all right. And we drove, and they took me to the Haven. The Haven I'd been by 2 weeks before. I think I touched on it in the book. I'd been at a site in Waynesbay doing security, and I needed a fix. And one of the builders, no knowing that I needed it, he probably did know, but he says, look, I can take you as far as Paisley. And we drove by the Haven, again, only a couple of weeks before, going, oh, that's in it. Says, the sign then says, the Haven Teen Challenge, Men's Christian Training Centre. It was that, didn't he say? And, that's funny, that. So when kids went, I just passed by this 2 weeks ago, I've never driven in this road other than that. And we went in, and the manager there was a guy called Finn Moffat, who graduated just a couple of weeks before. And a really defining moment in my life was to happen. So I was meant to go into the Haven on the Thursday and go down to Wales, the men's centre, on the Monday. So it was funny, Finn's got me in and out. And the Haven at that point is very polished now, but it was like basically a farm cottage with a wee bit of work done. And Finn was like, right, talking away and all the rest of it. He says, you got your deposit? I says, what deposit? He says, deposit for a bus. Mate, I'm a drug addict, am I going to get money for a bus fare? And it was all these things. I'd never been in this sort of surreal situation. And then he says to me, he called me back in and he says, Stuart, we're thinking about keeping you here for your induction, which is 4 weeks. I says, I'm not staying here. He says, what? I says, I've got a place down in Wales, mate. I says, you keep me here, the first time it's bad, I'll be up the road. And again, I'm not thinking like an addict. It's like, there's a knowledge, it's mad because you can over-describe it in a sense, but it was like I was making decisions that I never had the maturity to make. Do you know what I mean? And then he shot me again. But then he says these words to me. He says, Stuart, he says, you're no longer a junkie, you're no longer an addict. He says, you're a student. He says, you're not a Christian because you've not chosen to be. He says, but you're here to learn the Word of God 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether you like it or not. I thought he was exaggerating, but it never really dawned on me the full effect of what that says to me. It took away the excuse that I'd used through the past 13, 14 years. Where completing the tenor was everything, my addiction was everything. I can't help it, I need it, all that. He said, you can't use that as an excuse anymore. It's now about moving forward. So that was that, and that was one of the things where I love about the Teen Challenge ministry, still do. You're told when you're through the door, that door slammed on you. Mm-hmm. You can go and crowbar it open if you want, but that's not what it's about. We're not going into your past looking for excuses. We're going into your future looking for promise, and that's what we're taught. And so I went down to Wales. He says, right, you're going to Wales tomorrow. I got into Wales at 12:30 on the Friday night, almost to the minute, a week after I got the gun stuck in my back. I disused a converted supermarket, and when I walked through the doors, it's a funny story going down, but time won't allow me even to get into the story of the guy went down with. But when I walked through the back door at that time of night, for the first time in my life, I felt home. And I didn't understand it, I'd never been, but going through a back door, even though I was going through the search and my bag's been set, the peace in me, still nobody had preached the gospel, the peace in me though was incredible. It really was. I just thought, that relief you get, that sense that everything's right, first time in my life I've ever experienced
It's awesome,
that.
like, I guess, to look back. We would use theological terms now, but to see God's hand of providence
Aye.
in all these ways,
Yeah.
that He was, like, He's directed to this. You've
Yeah.
seen this before. You see the money came. That you're meant to wait 6 weeks to get in the Teen Challenge.
6 weeks,
You
and you're
wait
supposed
a
to go
week,
to visit a bus and visit a local church once a week for 6 weeks to show that you're serious.
but you got in a week,
Oh yeah,
which is clearly of the Lord as well.
But yeah, I asked Ken about that, and he says, well, I didn't care. He says, you were the last guy in Glasgow I worked with. I was moving to London the following week. He says, but we knew, I had talked to him. He says, I'd really pushed it, and we knew that this was your now moment. I says, see, if I'd been told 6 weeks, I'd be dead. He says, there's no way around it, because I wouldn't have waited 6 weeks. It was I never had the mentality or the patience for that. You know what I mean?
So you're down in Wales in the programme, like, so I don't know, I've been learning a wee bit more of Teen Challenge recently, which I sounds really helpful. Like, and it's very Christian. So you, as you say, you're there. It's a training centre, whatever they call it. Like,
Yeah.
clearly you're not, like, you didn't know the gospel, hadn't heard the gospel, weren't, like, you hadn't chosen to follow Jesus. Like, so what are you thinking there? Are you like, these are a bunch of weird Christians, why am I here? Or did it, like...
Well, I think if you go into a Christian place as a non-Christian, you should think they're weird. You should think they're mad. Well, even we see that in the day of Pentecost, you should think they're drunk. And if you don't, then there's something wrong. Do you know what I mean? But no, I went in. So bearing in mind, John Macy, who was the national director of Teen Challenge at the time, calls it the addict is a perfect chameleon. They'll learn how to blend in to the environment. But I went in that night, and the next morning was sort of weird, where you begin the adaptation process to do the chameleon, to fit in with what's going on, because you have to get your footing. You have to try and suss out what's going on. But it was kind of weird, and I'll never forget, and you know, I developed a devotional based on this. First morning quiet time, I'm going to sit in a lounge with 20 odd other guys. I'm handed a used Bible, and I'm told I need to sit on the sofa for 15 minutes. And if you turn around and see any of your other guys, what did they? And I'm like, shh, because you got a white ticket at that time, which is a report to your counsellor for talking. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. Do you know what I mean?
Maybe that's how we get our guys at the quiet times.
Sit down, shut, read the Bible.
But it was like, you know, it was one of, I don't know what to do. So it was, you know, it was that sort of surreal. And there was some fantastic stuff that happened that first morning that, you know, on reflection and with the theological terms. I mean, when I tell a story, I try and notice why I know Mezzi's fantastic book about when he talked about the sexual abuse. He's brilliant at bringing the theology through. I very deliberately tried not to do that because I wanted it, try and write it as it was at the time.
And it's a story, isn't it? It's
Reflection, aye, on that. But it was surreal. But I still wasn't looking for a fix. It was mental to try and describe it. I was thinking like an addict in the sense of, like, I'm in this situation, how do, you know, no knowing what it was. And basically I'm thinking, how the heck did I get here? Which comes up then when somebody else offers to pray for me on the Sunday night, and I thought, wait a minute, the last time somebody prayed for me, I did
What's going to happen next week?
I just wanted a fiver. But that was what the effect that Ken's prayer had on me, which has been lifelong, where I learned pray first, talk later. So, you know, it was because of that. And, you know, no try to outdo God at thinking we're better at counselling than he is at moving through prayer.
That's awesome. So how did you then come to hear the gospel, like really start to see what it is to be a Christian and not just drug-free? So,
well, coming in at the weekend was an advantage because it gave me a little breathing space, you know, to get used to the atmosphere without being put straight into class. And Teen Challenge are good. They have that 4-week induction period to let you do that. But I went to City Temple. City Temple's the Swansea Elam church where all the guys went, all the girls went. 500-600, very strong church. Phil was also the chairman of Teen Challenge at that time. He's the chief executive now. And I have to be honest, so we go there, it's a 15-mile journey. Go there in the morning, I mean, bearing in mind, I've spent the past how many years where I'm awake all night and sleeping all day. So all of a sudden, I'm expected to go up at 7:15 in the morning and go to bed at 10:30 at night. So at 10:30 in the morning for Sunday service, I couldn't tell you a thing about it. The Sunday evening service, I'm sitting there, Phil's preaching, I'm pretty sure it was a phenomenal gospel message. Chris Rusin doing the worship, I'd never seen a worship band in church. Chris Rusin to this day, I still think is one of the most gentle, humble worship leaders I've ever had the experience of sitting in. You know, one of these guys will just play the first keys and you're in heaven. And I know that Phil preached a gospel message, can't tell you anything about it, but he done an altar call. Now bear in mind, I've no experience of this. I've never encountered anything like this. But he done this altar call, and I'm trying not to think in terms that I would use now, but there was a desire in me to respond. I needed to, so, obviously that was calling people up to respond to what Phil had spoke on. I wanted to respond to something I hadn't heard.
Yes.
It was weird, but I needed to, and the desire to do it was overwhelming. And I've spoke to one of the staff members, a guy called Phil Winstanley, sitting next and says, can I go out? And I still think I'm the only Teen Challenge student in the history of Teen Challenge to be refused to attend an altar call, because he says, no, he's looked at the other, no, because I'm the new guy, I'm only just in, so they're trying to make sure that I'm safe, but So what happened was, they took me back to the centre. Pastor Robert Hughes is there, gentle man, ex-soldier, really godly apostolic minister, something about the old school apostolics like that, and into his office, and I says to him what I was experiencing, and you're trying to put words to something you don't know, and I says, I just feel that I need to, and he says, well, do you want to pray or do you want me to pray? And that was when I'm like, well, that word prayer again. And I says, like, I don't know what to say, and it wasn't being facetious, it wasn't even when Ken had offered to pray where I was trying to work an angle, I just genuinely didn't know, but I wasn't scared. And so I couldn't even tell you the words it says. So we're not even talking about a gospel of understanding sin and redemption at this point. It was just a response to something that the Holy Spirit was doing in me. And he prayed for me, and I said amen, and it was like something changed. It wasn't like angels come into the room and all these reasons why a lot of the gospels were banned for the Bible. It was nothing like that. But I was aware that all of a sudden my perspective had changed. It was as if I'd been given a glimpse that I was new involved in something bigger. And it was amazing like how even just some of the incidences in the past week were beginning to sort of make sense. And I remember going up to the landing where all the students' bedrooms are and saying, guys, I just gave my life to Jesus. And they're all like, big deal, everybody does that. Do you know what I mean? But I was like, no, seriously. And so talk about the gospel, you're going into class then. So class for me on a Monday, we begin. The Teen Challenge programme is what discipleship should be for any new Christian. It's no make a decision at the altar, that's it, you're saved, that's it, you're going to heaven. It's okay, we need to learn from the promise that we inherited. So the Teen Challenge group studies is based around things like, how can I know I'm a Christian? Which is step by step showing you what the gospel is in a very practical manner. Growing through failure, obedience to God, obedience to man, successful Christian living, spiritual power and the supernatural. Quite challenging. You take a guy that only, some cases, weeks before, was an addict and tell him to write a letter to parents who've just lost their child because some faith preacher told them that God had healed them so they could stop giving their child medication. That's part of the Teen Challenge programme, is that you have to write in a loving, graceful, non-judgmental way how you would speak to those parents. And you know what I mean? And so we're going through all that in the classes, but every morning we would do chapel, and every morning there was either a student or a staff member up talking about God's incredible love on Calvary. And it's one of these things where you don't know when it is. Like, I'd already knew I was part of something bigger, but that unfolding and unveiling just how big a deal this was. And I think it started to make more sense to me in the light of what Finn had says about you're no longer an addict. So him saying you're not a Christian yet always got to me. But it was understanding, without knowing the terminology or the years of experience, that God had done something absolutely incredible that allowed me to be in a place that didn't look what I thought a rehab would look like. Language wasn't what I thought rehab was going to be like, or nothing like it. And actually the people were so different from anything I'd experienced. And so there was the gradual unveiling, even though there had been the moment of beginning. Yeah. But it was, I don't think I've ever tried to think about it in such detail. But it was so incredible.
And
it really was.
Was there then, you're saying, like a kind of a gradual dawning of, I guess, what we might say is conviction of sin, like an awareness of some of the choices you made?
Sunday night. I remember going into my room the Sunday night, shared with a great guy from Dublin, and it was like, I had been told, here's what will happen, so there was this sense of, it's normal Teen Challenge language, what's going to happen is the Holy Ghost is going to take you on a journey, right? And they call it the forgiveness journey, take you through, and it wasn't. So whereas before, if I'd went on this, I'd have needed to get a fix because the guilt and the shame had been overwhelming. But it was about dealing with key points, and it was funny for me. That journey was key defining points. There's another one I talk about, Airplane Gaze, where I'm staring up at this boyhood dream that was gone, and so key moments like that, and understanding that God was giving me this. So and it was like, oh God, I'm sorry, and thinking of the people that had been hurt and upset. And so I'm trying to put a 51-year-old's mind into a 27-year-old's experience of it. But at no time did I feel condemnation. At no time did I feel... But it did get harder, because bearing in mind, as an addict, anytime you're dealing with crisis, you have a fix. And it wasn't even that I never had that coping mechanism, but I never even had the awareness of having it, which meant I really was naked. And I had nothing to protect me. I had no way out, no escape from it. And I think it's one of the greatest advantages someone that's in addiction has in coming to Christ, is that sense that your coping mechanisms are so obviously wrong that when you know you can't turn to them, you have no choice but to turn to Christ.
And I think there's also something, isn't there, about when you're aware that your life is a mess, when you're aware that you are a sinner, you've made some stupid choices, you've been rebelling against God, and you've been causing a havoc for everybody, and yet Christ loves you enough to die for you. That those two things together, it just magnifies the love of Jesus, doesn't it? Because it's like, I'm like this, and you still did that, and it's awesome to hear you that kind of come through.
Well, it's one of the things, because bear in mind, you go to people in the scheme, and that's a lot of friends, and you say, what got me was God loved me. And I go, look, I'm from the scheme, I did drugs, I did gangs, I had done everything that was wrong in life. I was so caught up in an unchristian, ungodly life. I was, even with my mouth, I was worse than John Newton, who wrote Amazing Grace, who even a ship's captain was embarrassed about how much it cost. So I says, I get all that. But it was how practical God's love was shown us to be, and how we miss out as church leaders if we're not taking the same practical step with ministries like Teen Challenge do, which is discipleship. Because that's the unveiling of God's love. Look, we talk about it as a starting point, but it's not the starting point. It's like, what is it? Justification, sanctification, and glorification. I have been saved, I am being saved, I will be saved. It's that ongoing where God's love begins to get inside us as we trust in Him and transform. And I was aware that was going on, even though I never had the knowledge. But it was hard work for the first 2 weeks.
And again, I love that, because again, one of the things we're trying to talk about discipling, is that very much this matters in life. It's not just, as you said, that one big altar call moment. It does matter, and it's going to be hard. And guys I've spoke to from similar backgrounds would say that this moment's great, but the battle gets more intense in some ways, from that word on. So it's good to hear that. The other thing I kind of clicked from your book is there's a real love of the Bible that kind of came through. You're spending a lot of time, in quiet time and stuff with the Bible. Did that just come through Teen Challenge? Or?
I had good people. I had good people that just loved the Word. I mean, the most maligned book even in church these days, Leviticus. Jim Stead, whose wife just passed away, Jean was a legend. We're getting distracted with the other feet back there. Just
make sure it's okay. The camera's okay.
Yeah, we're all good. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Listen,
I missed something while I was doing all that.
Let me look at this camera. Life has distractions. I had good people that showed me, that it wasn't about Old Testament versus New Testament, but it was about Christ. It was about God's love for us seen through Christ. And the cliches that we take, the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is Old Testament revealed. You can't have one without the other. And just that absolute love for it. And it was what happened to me. It was why, as I says, it's one of the defining moments for me was when I realised about 9 months in that there's something I hadn't thought about. And it was like, what it's like when you're nearly trying to force a thought through into your mind, but you don't know what the thought is. And when it came, it was so overwhelming when for the first time I realised that I hadn't really thought about drugs. Smoking is different. There was one episode with that. But I hadn't really thought about drugs in about 9 months, or about 6 months in this 9 months. And to think about that in the context of what we're going through as a nation just now, how utterly stupid that sounds, but it was the reality of my situation. My wife describes it best when she says, it's like when there's a toddler running around with something dangerous in their hand, you don't draw their attention to the dangerous thing, you offer them something far more appealing. And that's what God had done. And we say the gospel to the fact that we nearly where a lot of people these days with social media, as soon as they hear the word gospel, they close their mind. But actually, here's what had happened was this new life, even in the confinement of a programme, the community side, it was nearly what New Testament church was like. Conversations were all about the Bible. The dinner table conversation was about the Bible. There had been episodes where getting caught up when another 4 guys from the East End of Glasgow were there at the same time. But there was just something grabbed me about it that I wanted to know more. The chapel times, it was the old acetates overheads. I used to go in to learn what the songs were before chapel time, because if I was going to be doing the acetates, I wanted to know what these songs were rather than, doing Christian karaoke. Not knocking it, but it was more than about wanting to know the songs. I wanted to know the truths of the songs. And that was it. And I was still a loner. I'd spent a long time working in security on building sites and nearly perfecting that sense of being distant from people, which is the major effect that addiction had on me. I hated people. I don't hate people. I hated being around people, because it would allow the reality of how far I had gone to come in. But the classes, they were so practical. It wasn't just, where you say, I know this isn't in the Bible, but it wasn't just like saying that first instance, there you go, you're a Christian, go and have life. It was like teaching us how much truth and how measured and how well engineered the whole Bible was, and how its fruit in my life was going to be the unlocking of God's purpose and promise for me.
Which is great. And again, as a church, we were looking at Philippians, one of our prayer meetings recently, and the whole idea of I've counted everything a loss from knowing Christ. Knowing Jesus is the most valuable, satisfying thing in this universe. And again, you've explained that well, haven't you? I love that analogy about don't take away you don't draw attention to it, here's something much more precious. And I guess what you're saying is that you saw Jesus was just the most precious, satisfying person that
it was incredible. I mean, there was times I used to John Macy again used to, he's one of the most incredible, I know you'll say that, but that was how incredible the people that were around us were. I mean, these guys had never touched a drink, never mind a drug in their life. And so that lie about you have to have experienced it to bring truth, it's just complete rubbish. When you know God, you can bring people through experiences you've never had. Because it's not the experience you're bringing them out of, it's the experience that you're bringing them out into that counts. David Wilkerson had never touched a drug or drink in his life when they went to a court in New York, but God worked behind the scenes to the fact they're in 140 countries now, setting guys free left, right and centre. But it's that, and you don't want to make it sound very soppy. It was tough. I mean, I talk in the book about, the first 2 weeks, like that, going through that stuff. It's great saying that you don't feel condemnation, but you still feel raw. When you realise how many times that you've taken advantage of people and you can't hide behind the veil of the stone, it's very raw. And I remember one time about 2 weeks in, going into the chapel, we blue NIV, sort of hard paperback Bible, highlighted here, there and everywhere. And I remember sitting in one of the seats behind the pulpit, just at the seats, and just sitting behind there and going, God, I don't, it was one of these ones, I don't know, I can't take this. And I've opened up the Bible, and it's funny because it's the same verse, but Jeremiah 29:11, and new experience to me. Everybody quotes him very wrongly, might add, in the most part. Do you know what I mean? Out of context. That was drummed into us. Don't use a verse out of context. But it was actually 12 and 13 when it says, when you seek me and search me with all your heart, I will be found by you, and I will bring you back from captivity, declares the Lord. Jeremiah's obviously speaking to a whole people that's in captivity and saying about it. The key wasn't getting caught up in your problems and the solution. The key wasn't getting caught up. And I remember there sitting thinking, that's me. I just got it. That's me. And you know the hymn which we've been singing, long my imprisoned spirit lay, fast bound in sin and nature's night. Thine eye cast I woke. I've forgotten the words.
I woke a dungeon flamed
with light. My chains fell off. My heart was 3-eyed rose, went forth and followed thee. The boy that came into the chapel 2 weeks after I had made a decision, and the man that left probably just 15 minutes later were two different people. It was so incredible.
And again, it's just awesome to see, that was a couple of weeks and what the Lord did there. Like, you 2 weeks ago had no thought about following Jesus, or no thought of leaving this behind, nothing, and then God's like, I'm doing something here, and kind of just pulls in, what was it saying, Jude, like kind of snatches you from the fire, and is like, you're mine, we're going to change this. Like,
and it is the reality. There's some guys in addiction where it is like, like it says in Jude, we have to be gentle with, but there are others, like, thankfully, men like Ken Persad, Roy Lees and those others seen it in me, had to be snatched and put into a whole different location. They never argued with me. Finn never argued with me and said, no, you need to stay here, we have decided. Bear in mind, that's what I did my whole life from Hutchison's, was everybody else deciding without listening. Whatever happened with Finn, whoever he spoke with, thought, no, we're hearing what he's saying. So all this was new to me, people actually hearing me. But to sit there that day, it's, you know, it's again we say that, innit, because we see people talking about how the room was filled with a Shekinah glory, again, not really understanding what these things are. And it was like that, but it was a sense of me. It really was like this presence that was flooded with light. And it isn't like that was there present as a never present, but it was one of those moments where you saw through a veil darkly, and you just got it. And I went up and I changed, and I must have had the biggest grin on my face. But there was moments like that all through. I remember going into the programme, actually a boy not far from here, Ronnie Fullerton, we used to take shots each phoning Roy Lees every night saying my heads are wasted. And I remember phoning Roy and saying, Roy, look, see when me phone, see as soon as I go, my head's wasted, just hang up. You know, we're going through a bad patch, that's all right. We don't really want to come here. And it was all that learning how to deal, to cut those things off. Because bear in mind, we were good at manipulation, right? And apparently I phoned that and tried it with my mum-in-law, and my brother-in-law was raging. He was a bit of a cheat, but anyway. But you would pick on the weakest. But there was. I remember one time, it was a proper mental health blackout I was going through. I was a bit far into the programme. Evening class was personal study, you studied what you wanted. And I remember I felt so down. I mean, probably about 6 months. I just felt, and it was like a cloud of depression coming on me. And I'm walking into the lounge in Teen Challenge. It was 7:15. I know because you walked in and the quote was there and it's imprinted. And I just, and something struck me. I don't have to feel this way. I'm not knocking people that are genuinely suffering from clinical depression. I'm talking about those that know the clouds coming upon them, where they're going into, you know, we'll diagnose depression these days so easily when actually somebody's just going through a bad time. Yeah. And we'll prescribe medication rather than say, you know what, you're going through a bad time, you're going to have to go through it. Yeah. But something again struck me, I actually don't have to feel this way. I can choose not to dwell on that. And I went back to the class, my friend Mark Gamson, who was a staff member at the time, sitting at front, and he pulled me up and took me, he says, what are you grinning at? And I says to him, I says, I can't help. I says, Mark, if you'd seen me and a couple of other guys just 20 minutes ago, says it really was, it was like that. And again, it was these wee learning experiences, not to indulge your pain.
So I guess that's the kind of part 2 here is what Jesus was doing, breaking in, saving you, transforming you, awesome. And then the next part of that is you're then called into that ministry yourself. You're given like preaching opportunities and stuff. Like,
how mental is that?
What happened there? What's God doing? Does he not know who you should be?
No. I remember the first time Paul Evans, the boss, again, another really good man, taught me some really good life lessons in quiet moments. And first time. So you would share, the ministry team was a bunch of, on average, 10 guys. Most of us had been through the programme, going into places like churches and schools, just to share our story, to promote the ministry, but mostly to push the gospel. That was it. It was to present the good news. And we were allowed to go into places where normally, even at that time in the 90s, Christians weren't allowed to go in and be so open. We would have school teachers using it as saying that they were springing us in to show how to deliver a monologue, you know, all this stuff just to get us in. And of course, we're naive. We don't realise that most people haven't seen this, you know, which is good. You know what I mean? We're told, but it was a lot of stuff. One of the chapters in the book I talk about when I was called Primary 4 and presenting the school play, and that moment, I loved it. I loved that moment. There was something about it. For me, it's God foreshadowing what's to come in that sense.
The kind of public speaking.
Just that. I get to be me in it more than I get to be me even when I'm sitting doing this. So the real me, which is tapping into something which is bigger than me, and say to people, look, I want you to share, which is what preaching should be. Look how great God is. You know, it should never be, I'm not knocking 3-point sermons, but it should never be an academic exercise. It should always be about the greatness of God, the coming kingdom, and the teaching, correcting and rebuking when that's necessary. Do you know what I mean? And so we go to do that, travel all over the place where, you know, and I remember a couple of times when you would get a bit above yourself, where John Macy would say, you know, God's so great that we could put any idiot up there and they would sound eloquent. And
our church had to be all the time, actually. So
it's the anointing that breaks the yoke, no you.
God likes to use idiots, Pete, so, you know, just...
You go and preach to 1,000 on the Sunday night and come and clean the toilets on a Monday morning, and you knew how to keep you humble.
Fair play. It's great.
But I loved that. You know, everybody has a sweet spot with God, and it doesn't matter what your calling is, you just have that thing when you're close to God. And for me, it wasn't so much about the preaching, it's not like that thing. But that time when you might, and I know that you said, that time when you might be preaching, and it's not that you listen and go, that's good, it's you listen and go, where did that come from? And it's like, you know that the connection is pure at that point between you and heaven. You just know it, and it's not something that you can get across to the people, but you just know. You go home and you go, God, you're really connected with me there. You really. And it normally comes when we think we're rubbish.
Because the power is in the word, the power is in the spirit. Not in us,
I never said anything I was intending saying, and God's like, I know. So that developed. I was absolutely tremendously blessed and privileged, and it led to the first time I got to go on a plane, which is a boyhood dream, not to go on a plane, but to look out down below at the earth. There's something about it that's always captivated me, and it was a Virgin Atlantic flight to Swaziland to help promote a new teen challenge ministry. And I probably cried, other than annoying Pete Ryan, who I'm still friends with, because, you know, I got on the plane, but I was in the middle seat, tier 3, sort of, and I just thought that's. I remember sitting there with a lot of guys who'd had Christian crack or double shot espressos. 1998, that was a novelty. But they got it thinking this was great. They should have known when the coffee mark, the stall, was away in a wee corner spot, and he threw away for everything else at that point. And they're all like that, and I'm sitting there going, God, I can't believe you put me on the middle. And then Peter Ryan swapped seats with me after I annoyed him. He'll still be very honest and tell you I was a pain in the backside. And I wept flying over Africa and just looking down, fell asleep and woke up as we're coming into Johannesburg, and I thought, this is nothing to do with ministry, it's nothing to do with calling, it's nothing to do with saving souls, it's just a father blessing his child. That was it. And that alone could keep me for the rest of my life, just that sight of
seeing the goodness of God.
Now, if you've ever flown into Johannesburg, you'll know it's pretty bland. But it's the most beautiful sight I've ever seen in my life.
So you were doing like the travelling thing, and like, I know Teen Challenge still would do that. And then there kind of came a point when you were going to leave that. Like, what came about there?
I probably should have left about a year before. You know, there's that unsettling. There was one of these moments between me and God again. I'm sitting in a house. So this was before the phone call, but I'm sitting in a house, and I just remember thinking, and it's like, I remember John Kilpatrick in Brownsville, Pensacola during the revival preached a great message on the Eagle's Nest. A lot of people have copied, probably plagiarised it since. First time I heard it, and he talked about how everything that brings comfort to the egret, the young eagle, you know, the feathers and all that, when it's time for eagle to leave, the mother begins to strip the nest bare, so that the things that used to bring comfort now irritate and annoy, and to the point then that if the eagle won't leave, she'll flick it out. I mean, she'll swoop down and kick, but you're thrown out. And it was beginning to feel a bit like that in Teen Challenge. The things I used to enjoy were becoming uncomfortable. And Guy was my friend that I shared the house with. He's now my brother-in-law. He would get very hyper after he preached. I mean, ridiculously hyper, right? He still does. But he'd been home, he's from Dublin, he'd been home at Christmas speaking to one of his assistant pastor at St Mark's Church in Dublin, and but she wasn't in, and he talked to his daughter. So I'm in the other room, and I'm like, you know, like curiosity, my room was at the front of the house, the sitting room's at the back. And so I've walked in, and the next thing he's done is like, here, talk to my mate. Nobody ever talks to him. And, you know, it was just so ridiculous. I remember somebody, I can't believe you're honest about it. But that's the story. He's, you know, such a great mate. It says, and, you know, you can imagine that awkward silence as I'm talking to this lass on the phone. We never really says much. And then, so I handed the phone back to him after saying nothing. He went, write him a letter. Nobody ever writes to him, which wasn't true. But, you know, and then...
He's like Match.com here.
He wasn't very good at it. And, well, actually, he was, wasn't he? Because we're married 20 years next month.
He had a plan.
But I phoned my mum just after. I says, Mum, what do you make of this Stephen fella trying to get me married after some Irish woman? Now, this is a nothing statement, but in the context of how I was just a couple of years before, she went, you better know it's bad enough you're doing in Wales. And that was it. So Tracy did. She sent me a letter just a couple of weeks later. Very nice, very encouraging, actually. Actually, very godly. We still have the letters just to prove to my daughters they were godly letters. Awesome. And just encouraging each other. And then she came over with a whole bunch. A whole bunch used to come to Ireland for the graduations because there was always Irish people graduating. And she came with them, and I was on the sound and all that. At that time, they decided my singing was so good that they had to... Anyway. And so I'm running about, and, you know, she's there, and her wee daughter's there running about. And I knew who the daughter was. This wee, beautiful, wee blonde-haired lassie running about. And so I went to see Tracy. And I was still very awkward around people. I'd had relationships, but I'd never had a long-term relationship. My love affair before Teen Challenge was heroin. It really was. and it sort of preserved me in a lot of ways. And but it was just funny how that night went. But they were all staying in the Apostolic Training Centre, the Bible College, which was around the corner for our house. Stephen wanted his King's Crisps off them. That's what it was. And we went around. I was supposed to meet up with Tracy, but it's one of them, you know, the imposter syndrome kicks in. I don't want to get into a conversation because they'll see how bad I am, sort of thing. And but we ended up going around and we talked for hours in the kitchen and went a walk. And both of us knew right away we're going to be married. We knew that night. Do you know what I mean? And so, but that started the Leaving Teen Challenge. We met, see back and forward a couple of times. Stayed with my friends Jay and Fiona, who were pastors, graduate and all, great evangelist. And but I remember after one visit, I went in to speak to Paul Evans, who was my direct boss for Evidence. And I says, Paul, I'm going to hand in my notice, 3 months' notice. They went, oh, one lassie comes fluttering around. I says, it's not like that, and you know that. And he went, and I remember saying, probably the most mature statement that ever came out of my mouth at that time, Paul, I'm not asking you to agree with my decision, but I am asking you to respect it. And he just went out, and you know what? He actually increased the opportunities for me to preach and all that after that. Mm-hmm. It's good. The senior management, they called me emotionally immature at the time. It was time for me to go. They offered me a position going to Swaziland to head up the prison ministry. And so, but it was again that, and I just says, can I ask you something? Says, if I hadn't handed in my notice, would you have offered me it? And they went, probably not. I says, well, it's not a God thing. So, says it's manipulation, and I'm better than you.
I've got some experience in that.
But that is what it was, and I thought, no. So,
and then you ended up in Dublin.
I did. I came back to Scotland. I came back to Glasgow for 3 months under the we left in July, so it was 2 months. All these promises that was going to open up for me, and nothing did. I went over to Dublin. Funnily enough, went over the week before the 11th of September, because the 11th of September, the year before the 11th of September, funnily enough, was... so I went over, and Stephen was new over there. He was new engaged to Tracy's sister, and all the rest. It was kind of weird. But he says, listen, he started working a factory called Blenders, and he says, I've got you an interview. I says, what do you mean you got me an interview? He says, for a job. And I said, why? And he went, no, so I turned up for the interview, and I've never, and I've sat down with a wonderful woman, Deirdre Byrne. She was the factory shop supervisor, and she says, you don't need to worry about your past, Stephen's already told me. And I'm like, what? She says, I already know you used to take drugs. Don't worry about that, that's not the type of company we are, we just want to know, can you do the job? And she says, when can you start? I says, I live in Scotland, it's a bit far to travel. And it just worked out that I moved over, I think that Sunday, and it was funny, Ryanair those days didn't charge for luggage, you had bags and boxes.
It was like a tenner, I go back up, like tenner flights or something.
I was running about that, but it was mental. I had boxes and boxes of books and everything all coming through. And I started work that day in that Monday in Blenders. What a fantastic job. The two brothers that had started it, I'd go into a lot of churches and all that and talk about how these guys knew how to encourage, inspire and criticise. Mm-hmm. You just knew, they knew how to build team, and any time there was a win for the company, it was shared with the company, which meant when there was issues like, for instance, a blue plaster was found in a pasta sauce jar, that's what they made, they got to criticise the company. And it was brilliant, I shared it many times, and even to this day it was like, if you know how to encourage people, they will take your criticism. Mm. If they only hear from you when you criticise, don't be surprised if they get defensive. Mm. Do you know what I mean? And I think there's a good lesson for that, for us pastors that's in that we make sure we encourage people even in the small things. They'll be far more willing to listen to the stuff that might be preemptory.
I was listening a couple weeks ago, the whole sermon and the Preach the Word, 1 Timothy thing, and it was like rebuke, but also encourage. Mm. He says, if all you do is rebuke and correct, and not encourage, that you're not doing that. So. Yeah,
if you're rebuking, I mean, you're squashing it, you're condensing it, and they need that air breathed into them as well. They need that life breathed into them as well.
So anyway, so God's clearly at work here, opening doors again, as he's been doing. And then there's a move into, I guess, what we might call pastoral ministry, or once you've got married and stuff. So
I think we'd always been sort of involved, because St Mark's was a big church, and I'd been through a couple of jobs. I worked in Blenders for a year and a half, ended up, I was promoted 3 times in the year and a half, just by applying what I'd been taught as a Christian. Worked for another company, Christian charity, working long-term unemployed, and then I was invited to work for St Mark's as the administrator. Okay. But it was basically so that I could get paid. I was doing a lot of stuff for nothing, and it was so I didn't have to work and do that. But with several house groups, we had one in our home, and there'd be 20 to 25 people at it. But when it was obvious it was time to leave St. Mark's, I remember Gary Davidson had says to us, have you considered pastoral ministry? And Tracy says, where? And I went, that's not important. Do you know what I mean? And Gary went, that's right. And we moved up to Northern Ireland. We were long process in moving up. It wasn't that simple, but that was around about August, September. And we immigrated from Dublin to Ballymena, and it is immigration.
Do you know, I didn't even know that about you. And when I read that, my granny used to live just in Cullybacky.
Okay, I'm in Cullybacky, good friends, yeah.
So,
worked in Wrights and all, obviously, which is just along the road in Gilgorm.
Yeah.
But Ballymena, if you ask my wife where she would move to, if she was given the freedom to move anywhere in the British Isles, because, you know, Irish people, if you're listening, the south is still part of the British Isles. It might not be the UK, but it would be Ballymena. And yet, the church was the proper school of Christ for us. I don't really go into that because I think it was the one time where it gets so toxic for us that it was very, very difficult. And I really struggled with mental health at that time, but yet there was men like Jeff Wright and that who, you know, some of the most picked on or the most godly we know, what Jeff Wright at that time were actually proper angels for us at that point in our life, and we needed it. And so that was how we moved up there. Lifelong friends, lifelong. Ballymena, we absolutely loved it. I also then, when the Assemblies of God came to a pause, I was asked, Phil Hills, funnily enough, had moved to pastor Dundonald Elam Church in Northern Ireland just months after I moved. Again, key positioning by God, because if Phil hadn't been there, I would have had nobody I could have trusted to turn to at a really dark time. And Phil was brilliant, but he also got me into a leadership position in another Elam church alongside another guy, because I thought we need to keep that going on in your life. And at this time I felt like anything but a leader. But again, great friends. Funnily enough, one of the women for the church messaged me the other day about one of her family members struggling with addiction and could I point her to anybody. And because Northern Ireland was so key for us, within half an hour we had somebody local in touch with her and saying, let's deal with this. And I'm a networker. You know, I love that. You know, they don't need to know who's joined the dots. They just need to know that God's moving on their behalf. But Ballymena was tough, and even knew it nearly brings tears to my eyes, and yet I would not swap it for a world, because I've seen God moving in ways. I mean, do you know Ballymena?
A wee bit.
The shops, we're being in. I remember there where McDonald's is, because McDonald's is key for ministers. I remember walking down there one day. Tracy was working special needs assistant in school, and I'm walking down, and I won't say I was suicidal, it wasn't like that, but I was like, God, where are you in this? Because that's what I've been taught to. Where are you in this? And there was always that, hold on, trust me. Where are you? And you had to, some of the provision we'd seen was ridiculous. It really was. And but it was tough, and it was very lonely.
I guess that's, you can look back now, as you say, and you see often, don't we, that in the hardest times of our life, God is doing things that we could never even imagine. Like John Piper, one of the guys we love, says that God's always doing 1,000 things in your life, and you're maybe only aware of 3 of them. And it's really through those trials that that you kind of grow. Who
knows, that mother might not have had somewhere, because for whatever reasons, you know what Northern Ireland's like, everybody believes in God, most keep them at a distance, right? And but that mother might not have had anywhere to turn to if I hadn't went through that.
And the Lord is working in all of that. And then, so let's get back to Easterhouse then. So how did you end up?
Northern Ireland was over. It was very. I've always used Mark chapter 5 in the story of the man that calls himself Legion. I'm very deliberate with language. He called himself Legion, all the demons did, but I don't think that's what his mum named him, because labels are important. But I'd always used that many times sharing my story. Like even you heard me saying, like when he throws himself at Jesus' feet, and then he goes up and says, "Well, you also going to torment me?" And I says, I know that many commentators will say that that's the demons crying out. But as someone that had received supposed help from many people that never provided a cure, can I tell you that even for me, there were times when I thought, nah, this isn't real, this isn't going on. So I understood it from his point of view, his mental health point of view, looking at that. But I'd never really noticed the fact, I'd read it a million times. I mean, first of all, there's the fact that how quickly some commentators think 3 days it took for him to go from being demon-possessed to sitting clothed and in his right mind. But when Jesus says to him, I want you to go back to your friends and family and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you. And for the first time it really struck me that it's where the power of a testimony can go where Christ is not allowed. But I knew, when I'd read that day, I knew mostly in the middle of preaching, God's calling me home. And it was that melodramatic, that cheesy.
Yeah.
But we just knew it was circumstances had all decided that it was time for that as well. And Teen Challenge over here at this time had tried to put some stuff in place to make the step easier for us. But we came home. I'd always, from my Teen Challenge days, for a young lassie called Margot Lafferty was murdered in Glasgow City Centre. When I was in Teen Challenge and you move, I was reminded that my friends back home that were dying. And I wrote a poem called Roll, and it talked about, I'm sick of seeing my friends dying, God, will you help use me? But I knew better than to try and make it, you know, God's calling or God's plan or purpose for me to try and fashion it from what I thought it should look like. So it was always trusting, but I always thought I was a good second man. I never thought I'd be the one that would start something. I always thought, I'm a good second man. I can do that really well. And it came obvious one day we were going to Harvest Christian Fellowship in Hamilton, and it just became obvious. One of my friends there, Maurice Logie, says, you're going to have to accept it's you. You're waiting on somebody coming, and God's already saying, I'm waiting on you. And we stepped up, and funnily enough, this Sunday, 20th of February 2011, we had our first service for Easterhouse Community Church. And
10 years?
10 years, aye. And you know, as small church in the schemes is not easy. But I remember the former pastor of Easterhouse Baptist Church saying, I hope this was a God unexpected revival. He says, in places like this, you're looking for diamonds in the coal. He says, it's hard. He says, and you're mining for every soul in victory. And that helped me. But at the same time, there's the mentality, it's like, but why does it have to be like that? Do you know what I mean? And so that was 10 years ago, and, you know, moving on. So my daughters are here. Some of the statistics that we get in social policy is the children of addicts are something like 80% likely to become addicts themselves. And I'll look at my kids and go, no. And, you know, that's the things that I always got. I remember one day, and I know it will come to a close, I remember one day sitting in Teen Challenge, wasn't in a relationship or nothing else. I remember God saying to me, you're not saying no for you, you're saying it for your children and grandchildren. It's the, you know, the curse of the father to the third and fourth generation, but the blessing of the righteous to 1,000. And the thought of being in a relationship, never mind having kids, was so alien to me. But that thought came from that, and it helped me with a lot of the long-term battles, and even in Ballymena, where are you? And so that for me, in watching my daughters and them in life and being such an integral part of the church, you know, Alicia and Naomi, my eldest and my youngest, leading worship through the lockdown from our own home and up to church. Zoe at university doing what she's doing, very active in the Christian Union in Glasgow, Caledonian and that, and you're thinking, I actually, God, you know what, I'm not asking you to take me home, but I could actually go home knowing that you've honoured what you said to me. Despite me probably 90% of the time not really honouring what I committed to.
Here, so that's really good end to the second part. We're definitely going to split this. But
sorry.
let's just quickly do the third part. I think we're going to do this shorter. Are we going to be able to keep recording, do you think?
I think we're okay.
It's a MacBook.
It's a bit long. We were at 8 minutes shy of 2 hours.
Wow.
See, that's at our age. That's fine. We'll be fine.
When I go to debate with the humanists for the BBC thing, that was 3.5 hours. I'm just saying.
Well, we're not debating here.
He edited that down to 5 minutes.
That's it, we've got ages then.
So, third bit is, I guess I want to just talk a little bit about how your ministry in this scheme or in the community of Easterhouse and what that looks like and kind of stuff. And I guess there's maybe some places where we'll be maybe different, which is maybe also helpful. But what has that been like then? Like, what has been your aim? Right, we're planting a church in Easterhouse. Like, obviously, we want to share the gospel with people who know Jesus. But what was that like for you?
I think in a lot of it, it's been very difficult, and the biggest barrier to it has been me and my mentality. And it's no that the mentality's never been come back in the victim mentality of, I used to be an addict or anything like that. But the vision was always, when the verse that says, can any good thing come out of Nazareth, talking about Jesus, and so can any good thing come out of Easter. So it was always, for me, the vision was always very, very clear. A lighthouse to the local community, but also to the nation. And I think as a church, with some of the Arise stuff that were put on the second part, it sounds vain, and I don't mean it that way, but I think we have to be confident. We say we are very, very good in the sense of how God uses us as a bodybuilder, and even in that was having to do some real deep soul searching with God. But 2 years ago, around about this time 2 years ago on that, because you look at the numbers, we all do it. You look at the numbers and go, God, what's going on here? And I can understand why David was censured for his census in that sense. Because like you said, God can be doing 1,000 different things. But what we learned was that through the different Arise events, so that would be the gala we do, so these big events that we do, that brings people together from all streams of the body of Christ to do stuff, whether it be Arise Women, the kids stuff or whatever. But it's good for building up the body, which actually is what the fivefold ministry is supposed to be about anyway, you know. And I used to say when I was in my Teen Challenge days, if anybody asked me what my calling is, I would always quote, you know, Isaiah and say, you know, I've got beautiful feet. And because the verse says, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who says to Zion, your God reigns. So before I really understood the fivefold ministry, I always knew my calling was an evangelist, but it was to the church, to show the church that God reigns, so that they can go out and show their communities that God reigns. And I think that I always struggled. I'd always say, I'm not a pastor, I'm having to do pastoring because nobody else would. And somebody that I really love and respect told me to shut up and stop it, because you will always act how you see yourself. And if I kept apologising for doing the pastoring, and it probably resulted a couple of times in me being very unfair to people that were very good and gifted and had come alongside because of the insecurities in that side of me. I knew we were good at the bodybuilding stuff. I knew that God was using us to do that, but the community was different. But actually so when it came to, we have a good core group that we've kept, you know, 15, 20 people, good core group. It used to be, we started Sunday evening meetings because it allowed other people for other churches to come and help join in. So you were looking for the switch over and it became more your own. So they get bored, they get fed up, they go back to their own churches. Because it's easier, but it's easier because it's what they're used to. And so I was always keen on discipling. So for us, Bible study was always the most important meeting of the week. The Sunday was a celebration. It wasn't, the Sunday was never church for us in that sense of how we think about it. I remember John Andrews, a good friend, we talked about this. For me, the church was the Abrahamic altar of worship, as in Abraham in his early years. He would just stop. I mean, he was pretty terrible in the everyday, really. But he would stop and build a stone altar and say, let's worship God. And so for me, that was always what the Sunday worship was about. It was that, okay, let's stop doing what we're doing and take time out and worship God. And it was always trying to build that in. We were really blessed that we would have really good worship people, music, as in music and praise people, coming along, helping us with that. We loved the fact that they always said that they experienced a real freedom in these truths that they wouldn't even experience in their own church. That, I would say, comes directly, not just from Tracy's experience in the early days of St. Mark's, which was like that, but my Teen Challenge upbringing where, and even to Ken's original prayer, let God be God and us be witnesses. And, you know, that was it. So some of the key areas would be prayer. I believe fundamentally in prayer, as you can imagine, but not where if we have an altar call, you spend 20 minutes asking people what they're coming for prayer for. I am an authoritarian. I don't pray for people at the altar call because I don't want that. If pastor doesn't pray for me, I've not been prayed for. And I'm always, you know, if the Holy Ghost is going to touch these people at this moment, we believe that in the words you're building towards a response moment, and that's not always like that. A lot of the times it's teaching, but the Bible study is for teaching, it's for discipleship, which come together. That I don't need you to ask them why they're coming forward for prayer. God already knows. What I need you to do is to tell them that you're standing with them, and if God speaks, then he speaks, and if he doesn't, don't be scared of the silence. But I want it so that if people meet with God at the altar, they know it's God and not somebody just taking what they've said and giving back an emotional response to a heartfelt plea. And so that became, you know, we seen the Holy Spirit really moving on that. So when I hear cessationists talking about it, I just come to Easterhouse on a Sunday night. You know, I'm not interested in getting caught up in the doctrines over it. It's just when you've experienced the Holy Spirit moving and speaking into lives with knowledge that you don't have, you can't argue with that. And I'm always just wanting people to experience the Holy Spirit raising up Christ. But more than that, and I think we somehow miss out a lot because we do preach Christ and him crucified, but it's to build the bridge to God as a father. And that dynamic that, especially in a scheme, is so missing. That people don't have. Like, I had a dad, but he wasn't a father most of the time. Do you know what I mean? It's not knocking on him, he was who he was. But I do think there's a difference between that father who is able to affirm and to release, you know, and John Eldridge's book on it, I've always lived by it. The son's looking for a dad that says, I'm proud of you, and the daughter's looking for a dad that says, you're beautiful, you're my princess. And you're wanting that connection that we made with him. But Bible study for me has always been key. That's it, you know. I don't care if there's me and Tracy and the girls on a Sunday night. If we have a dozen at Bible study on a Tuesday, then we're a functioning, healthy church.
So here's so we, I guess, would be similar and different there. So we would say our church, you could be cessationist if you want, you could be continuationist, whatever you want to call that. The focus here is going to be Jesus, and the Spirit's key role is to speak through the word and lift up Jesus. So that's what we would be like.
But I don't, bearing in mind this is our conversation, this is probably the only time in my journey, May 1997, 24 years, that I would even enter into a conversation about cessationism, because I'm the same. It's about lifting up Christ, because he says, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. But I will talk about the experience, and anyway, so it's about the experience of the power of the Holy Spirit.
Again, so we would definitely want the Holy Spirit to work, and I guess our conviction, so where this is also similar as you're talking about the Bible study, so our conviction is that the Spirit will speak primarily through the Word, which is why, so I guess where we would differ is for our majority of our Sunday service, I'm looking out to where that is, we have a Bible open and I preach for 40 minutes through a passage, and we would be convicted that's where the Spirit is working through that. Now, I guess you're like yes and no. You're saying yes and no.
I would agree with you on that. I would think, well, here's in the beginning. So if we only have the Bible as our template, and one of the first proper revelations and revolutions I got as a Christian was, the Bible is not necessary for you to be saved, but it's absolutely fundamental for you to know that what you've experienced is salvation. Because only the Bible we have as a template for it. But in the beginning, God spoke, the Holy Spirit moved, and things were formed. And I'll say, I don't care how good your interpretation of the Bible is, I don't care how brilliant you think your book is, God, the Holy Spirit still only moves on God's Word. There is no other way, so we can talk about maybe a word of knowledge, and the first thing I'll say is, so if somebody comes to you, and it's amazing how in charismatic circles and all the rest of it, a guy that's lonely will have prophesied that he's going to have a blonde hair, blue eye. I did get that, but nobody prophesied that. Blonde hair, blue eyed wife, and everything's going to be okay. They go, but actually, the only New Testament prophecy we really have is, I'm going to show this man how much he must suffer for my name's sake. Do you know? So I would actually agree with you on that, but because my very introduction to Christianity was a man choosing prayer, but every prayer and every result of prayer from me has to be measured against the Word of God and in context.
And again, I think that's actually a massive.
I think we really agree, but it's just maybe a difference in the terminology,
and potentially a bit of a difference in how we might the practical outworking of that. But certainly, we would always say that you can know the Bible inside out, but unless the Spirit has broken in and brought that to life in you, then there's no point knowing the theology in your head but not in your heart. So I guess that's key. The other thing I was, again, just being about you guys a wee bit, we always get painted probably fairly as the fundamentalists that are we talk about sin a lot. So we'd still have people come through the door that would be like, I never heard so many people talk about sin so much. And again, we don't necessarily shy away from that. And I think there is a kind of, some of us might talk about sin, some of us might talk about brokenness. And not that they are completely different, they're obviously related, but even from how you've been talking through your story, there's probably been less of a talk on sin as I would have it, more to talk on the kind of, can you talk to that?
If I'm talking one-on-one to somebody, I try and think, so for me a key passage in how I conduct myself is Acts chapter 2, but not the prayer room in Pentecost, but they spoke in tongues that the common man heard and understood gladly. I think we need to be careful that we don't devalue biblical language by always changing the word we use. But if I'm sitting one-on-one with somebody, I will be honest and say, your problem's sin. And no matter how you dress up, here's what sin is. Sin is you trying to do in your way what God has ordained to be done his way. You're trying to do that. So the brokenness, David Wilkerson's very abrupt and all, he would always say, as an addict, your problem is that you have a sin problem. You don't have a drug problem, you have a sin problem that manifests itself in addiction. It's not a disease other than the sin disease. So, but you for the sake of trying to listen, you're trying to draw people in to what the language of the church is. But absolutely, sin and repentance, I hate the fact that so many have turned repentance into a dirty word. I think repentance is one of the most beautiful words in the English language. I really do. I hate the fact that people will go on about grace but not tell us the fruit of grace, which is repentance. Is that not the point of whether we call hyper grace or whatever, but isn't the message of the cross that because of Christ, I love the way that you says it, comes knocking and banging and hammering his way in, Is repentance that as in we turn away from how we were conducting ourselves and turn ourselves towards
Like
the
even
cross?
so, Pete is writing some devotions for us just now, going through the run up to Easter, and we're just reading through the Gospel of Mark. And so, was it yesterday's one, Pete? Was Mark 1:1, the good news of Jesus, Son of God, and you break it down to 1:15. Jesus' message is, Kingdom of God is here, so repent and believe the gospel, and that is good news. It's not like, I guess sometimes, and again, I think we maybe need to be thinking. I would agree with you in terms of like we want to make sure the words we are saying are what we mean by them, or what people hear, which is helpful. But definitely, the good news does involve we are sinners, and yet through grace we can repent and know Jesus. Like
and you know what? It might be one of the fruit of this for me is making me think about how I do that. My language isn't tempered for the approval of church. Do you know what I mean? My language is tempered that others might see Christ and Him crucified. And that's the thing. So I think we spend a lot of time talking about Jesus, who went about doing good and healing all those who were afflicted by the devil, but not enough about Jesus was nailed to a cross. I mean, that we were covered that in great depth in Tuesday night. We're using, believe it or not, Max Lucado does a Bible study on Psalms, which is fantastic. He wouldn't be most people's choice for doing discipleship. But how he goes through what forgiveness actually looks like and why, so if Christ takes that list of wrongs that you've done and hides it between himself and the cross, for instance, how dare you, so this one that they say, well, you don't have to forgive because Christ forgives, which is one of the ones out there. But and that's the language that the gospel, how dare you choose to go about revealing other people's sins when Christ has hidden yours? How dare you make that a response in you? So we're talking about reactions and responses. So how dare you, having received such great love, where Christ has taken your sin upon himself and has hidden it, not just from the world, but from heaven. And yet you want to go about and gossip and backbite and slander and reveal other people's sin and dress it up in church language. That is the greatest hypocrisy, and that's why even Paul says, I am the chief among sinners.
Right, here's the last one. We also get maybe talked about that we would speak about hell a lot more than anybody else speak of hell. Now, I'm from Northern Ireland, so that kind of is naturally in my blood. But I also think it's in the Bible. So when we're preaching good news, we want to hear what we say. We say that Jesus gives us hope for now and a hope for eternity. He gives us hope for now because we are messed up. Sin affects us now, but actually, there's no point if we just focus on the now of our life, if that's like this, if there's an eternity coming and there is a heaven and a hell, there is a judgment, then we don't want just to help people's life here. We want to help people's life here because we believe that we appointed once to die, and after that the judgment. And if we are not covered by Christ's blood, if we're not trusting in Jesus, then we will be condemned, rightfully be punished in hell. And so that's, I think, an important message.
I don't think you can get through today no matter how good the counsel, because it's only counselling if it's not fixed on eternity. It's only counselling if it's not fixed on the promise of what Christ has secured for us, and that's all it is counselling. It's guidance. It's like me going to a drug addict and saying, I can give you 12 steps to help you stop taking drugs. Why should you? Because actually what you're experiencing under the veil of drugs is probably better than what most other people experience during the sheer mundaneness of their life. And so I do preach on that a lot. I preach on, I am kingdom now, but only because of kingdom coming. It can only be because of that. I take great delight in showing the promise of heaven, but to do that, you have to counterbalance it by what you are, and it is a wrath. If God does all things well, then what he has prepared, not for us, but for the angelic host that is in rebellion, that we'll partake of, thankfully not us, then you better believe that it is somewhere. I mean, Jesus spoke more about hell than he did on heaven. He compared it to an eternally burning pile of rubbish outside the city that people would have been aware of, not just the flames, but the smell, the stench about it. And Ian Paisley, I remember when he's one of the best preachers on the cross you'll ever get, who get caught up in the politics. But I remember, one of his famous sayings about that, because it says with much wailing and gnashing of teeth, and somebody being rather cheeky with him, saying, what if you don't have any teeth? And he says, teeth will be provided.
Teeth will be provided.
And it is the wonder of the cross.
Because I think it makes the love of God more amazing when you see just what, like, if he took that wrath, Christ, for
upon
me,
himself,
so that I do not need to go to that, even though I am a wretch. And I think it makes people think it makes the gospel less good news, but I think it makes it more good news when you see the reality of both of those things.
I think it's because we're fixed in a temporal situation. Look, we are time controls us whether we like it or not, and I don't think people can really comprehend that actually the true reality isn't a temporal reality. It's like it's how God can be at the start of my bad choices and then still at the end at the same time, knowing how that's going to work out to pick me up.
It's okay, we lost the camera there, it's fine.
That's okay.
Good. Here, I think we should end this. This has been really, really helpful. So thank you, Stuart, so much. This will be a 3-parter, no doubt. But I think it'll be really helpful 3-parter for our members and guys about. But
no, I've really enjoyed it so much. I mean, wish I'd hurried up earlier and get into the.
No, let's just do this off camera more often. So that would be.
I know. No, but I enjoy it.
Exactly.
Jacob Reynolds, who was my principal when I done the Irish Bible Institute, which was predominantly Baptist in origin, but they would tell you non-denominational. And he had says, and he was brilliant, and it's what made me rethink what a worship service was. He says, what people think are major differences in theology normally boil down to minor differences in wording. Mm-hmm. Because fundamentally, we have to believe in heaven and hell. We have to believe that Christ took the wrath of God on himself. We have to believe that no matter how movie makers try and produce it, men being horrible to Jesus wasn't the horror of the cross. Yeah. That was what man called justice. The horror of the cross was the full-on unleashing of God's wrath on him. And that sense, for the first time in eternity, where Christ says, Father, have you forsaken me? That sense of his dad turning his back so he never has to turn his back again. And yet Christ still embraces it. And
so that's why, again, we would always say, if we can talk about these things with an open Bible, as brothers and sisters, then we're well up for talking about it. So I've just, again, really appreciate that. That's been awesome.
No, I've enjoyed it. It's been really good. Thank you.
This is the book. I don't know if you can see it's the camera. What was
I
it?
can't see nothing. I've no
Completing
glasses.
the 10 out.
This camera.
Oh, can we go here? You go.
That's fine.
You can buy from Amazon, but it's better if you choose from me because I get some money that way.
You get in touch with us if you get in touch with us on wherever you're listening to, we'll get you in touch with Stuart. And I think we've got a couple of copies for our members, hopefully today as well.
Yes,
but,
they're in my bag.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all that chat.
Thank you, guys. It's been fantastic.
Cool.
Thank you for listening to the My Hope Story podcast. To find out how you can have your own hope story, go to www.myhopestory.co.uk.